President Rippich is going to talk for a little bit about what UNE is doing to combat climate change. Then she's going to introduce Senator King. And then we're going to have a series of talks from people in this region who are doing their part to combat climate change at a regional level. Each of the speakers are going to speak for 10 minutes, and then we're going to have a panel at the end of that. So please wait for the questions for that panel. We do have a little time for Senator King to answer questions, but the others are going to all speak, and then at the end we're going to have a panel. So I would like to go ahead and start and present President Danielle Rippich, the President of the United States of the... Whoa! Now with that introduction, here is President Rippich.
Thank you. Thank you, Charles. Yeah, we needed a good laugh about that, I think. This is really inspiring to see all of you here today, and welcome to the University of New England. And I think there's nothing more important that we could probably be talking about this morning than the changes in climate. And so I'm really pleased that you took time out of your busy schedule, and I know the senator's schedule just got bumped up. He may not have time for questions. He's running on a tight schedule, and it's wonderful to have him with us today, but he may not be able to stay as long as he had originally thought. But before I start talking about the things that we're doing here at the University of New England and being good environmental stewards, I would like to thank the National Resources Council of Maine and the Citizens Climate Lobby for co-sponsoring this event today. You're wonderful institutions committed to addressing the problems of climate change, and I thank you. So let's welcome all of you to here. At UNE, we describe our mission as innovation for a healthier planet, and we tailor our academic programs in the health sciences, as well as environmental science, marine science, and biological science to support human health and environmental health. Sometimes I think our society has a tendency to think and talk about these concerns, human health and environmental health, as separate topics. Here at UNE, we believe they're inextricably linked. Our health as individuals, as a species, as a planet, are all together. And that's why UNE has been actively engaged in this movement at academic, administrative levels since the beginning of my time here at the university. In 2008, I was an early signatory to what was then called the American College and Universities Climate Commitment. It has since been renamed to the Carbon Commitment, but I have to tell you, we view it more broadly than the Carbon Commitment, but that's a good measurable benchmark that we have used. To date, more than 650 U.S. institutions have joined us in pledging to measure and report greenhouse gas emissions each year and develop a plan to achieve a net zero carbon footprint. And I just have to tell you, at campus where we have research labs, where we have some things that I don't like to call them energy sucks, but that take a lot of energy to manage. This is a challenge, but we have decided that we are not going to just use that as an excuse. We're continuing to be committed. We set our initial goal of being carbon neutral at 2040. Our climate action plan included interim reduction targets and allowances for growth, but not actually the growth that the university has had. But I'm proud to report, since we started our baseline levels in 2010, we have made steady progress every year. We have had a lot of growth in our, particularly in our on-campus student population. It rose 45%. It's a lot. Our physical plant square footage increased by over a third. So we added a third more physical square feet. We had, in our last test, or over this entire period, our greenhouse gas Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions increased only 17%. So while it's not perfect, we're certainly working in the right direction. We've accomplished this by looking, as I said, beyond the gas emissions more broadly. We've developed a green revolving fund to finance projects. Our environmental council is the only council in the university that has students, staff, and faculty working together to help us on this. And these folks have given us wonderful ideas. They meet regularly. They really have been extremely helpful to guide me. We've created alternative modes of transportation for students and employees, an intercampus shuttle, the zip cars, bike sharing programs, a number of things to help reduce that part of our carbon footprint. We've constructed LEED certified buildings on each campus. Our College of Pharmacy was our first building, and the Secaucus Hall here in Biddeford. We've implemented a number of building automation control through a large project working to eliminate more than 500 tons of emissions annually through all 11 buildings here on the Biddeford campus. And that's been a huge undertaking. We had some of these were old, as you know, these were some old buildings, and we really have made a lot of progress. We installed a hot water solar system on our Biddeford Campus Center and a solar electric system in the Portland campus as well. We added LED lighting retrofits to 19 buildings and most of our parking lots on both of our campuses. And we created an electric car charging station on both campuses, and those stations are powered by solar energy. So these are steady, stepwise. It's my dad always used to say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So sometimes it seems slow, but we really are trying to take some big bites out of this, and my hope would be that we would maybe be able to even move our goals up. And after today, I think you all will be rallying for us to move the date of that carbon neutral goal. The most exciting thing, I think, is we're developing an action plan that is going to be given to me in January of this year. So in the next month, there are folks on campus are working on a climate action plan for the university that we'll be able to follow. And we're currently building our University Commons building. That's going to really be the heart of the university. And I just want to tell you, it's a 3-story stairwell for students. It's going to be our dining, our study center, academic success, all of our tutoring, our internship folks, everybody is going to be in this building, so it'll be the heart of student life. But we have a 3-story green wall that our aquaponics students are looking at things that we're going to grow. I've told them they can grow anything but not marijuana. We're not going to have that. But other than that, they're going to guide us, and we'll use what we grow there we'll be able to use in the dining hall. We're going to have some solar panels for the building, which is very exciting. The hoods in the dining hall cook area, now we turn them on. You have low, high, that's it. These are going to be, they're sensitive, so as the grill cools off, the hood goes down. So they're more expensive, but they should pay us back in 3 years in terms of energy savings. So throughout the building, I just give you examples. The other one that I'm going to announce today, and I hope our building people, but I'm going to put a caveat. We're waiting to make sure we can get delivery, but a petition came from a number of our students and faculty to put bird glass in the building, and I didn't know what bird glass was, I have to admit. I've learned a lot about it. I've done some reading, and I became convinced that it was a really good idea for us. So we value engineered some things in the building. It has less tile and more bird glass now because it was more expensive. But we were able, the Audubon Society sent me a letter saying we're in a migratory bird path along the Saco River, and large expanses of glass can really be dangerous to birds. And so we found that the best product, we think, the really quality product in this is made in Germany. That's why we're waiting for confirmation. If we can get the bird glass, we will do the Saco River side, and then we have a glass catwalk between the Commons and the library on the second floor, so that will all be bird glass as well. It's really cool, and we have samples of it, and I think we'll be the first building in Maine to have bird glass. So we're hoping we're going to do a story about it for our students to learn and understand. So this building, this latest building we're building, is really going to hopefully it will reflect the core values that we have, as well as new design ideas. It will help us begin to live more softly on the earth. So I'm excited. So it's important that we walk our walk when it comes to sustainability, but we also are committed to creating academic programs and research opportunities that prepare students to play meaningful roles in whatever their career as they go forward. Through our core curriculum, influenced initially heavily by Owen Grumling, one of the pioneers in this area, and we certainly owe a lot to him. We ensure that every UNE student acquires a strong foundation in environmental literacy as well as social and global issues, so they are well equipped to to really tackle the questions, I think, of their generation. Climate change is a critical, we're handing them a problem to solve, and we want to give them the tools to solve it. This fall, we established a new minor in climate change studies that draws on faculty and courses from 8 different departments, and sometimes the interesting work comes, as I've learned, at the intersections of sciences and intersections of disciplines, and we believe that's true with this minor. I'm very excited about it. It will be one of only a dozen undergraduate climate change programs in the country, and today's event is really conceived as a kickoff, as a way for us to celebrate the beginning of this new minor. Events like this one are important in the role that they play in educating the wider public, the citizenry, about climate change. And we've done that in many ways. We hosted Bill McKibben. It was one other than Noam Chomsky. I think it was the largest attendance we've ever had for one of our global humanities lectures. Mitch Tomashow, a really good friend of mine who used to be president of Unity College, has been on campus a number of times, was just here about a year ago to encourage us and give us some guidance as we looked at how do we engage the wider community in an active role in safeguarding the environment. Our research efforts, too, are essential, and our Department of Marine Sciences student faculty are engaging in research to particularly help Maine in their area of the ocean waters. Barry Costa Pierce, who calls this the century of the ocean, I like that, it's very expansive, but it speaks to, I think, the importance of that part of our environment as well. They are really helping us get a valuable perspective on Maine's ocean economy. Our faculty are working with students to research the effects of invasive species like green crabs, to investigate the ramifications of rising sea levels on our coastal marshes, really important habitats that may be endangered. And you'll learn a lot more about these. Dr. Costa Pierce is going to speak this afternoon, and there are a lot of posters in the lobby. I encourage you to take time. There's some interesting work going on with our students and faculty. So, here we are at this critical time for our planet, here in this beautiful state of Maine, and how fortunate we are to have an ally in Washington in the person of our own Senator Angus King. Senator King has been a vocal advocate for this cause, warning of the effects of climate change on Maine, on the nation, and on the world. He's taken fact-finding trips to the Arctic to see the rapidly shrinking glaciers, has spoken publicly numerous times about the effects of global climate change on our health, on national security, and on our economy. He has said that we have an obligation to our children to leave them a healthy, thriving planet, and has encouraged conservation, energy efficiency, and the development of energy alternative sources such as solar and wind. Leadership matters. And we are fortunate to have this gentleman leading our efforts, a wonderful friend of the University of New England, a wonderful friend of the environment, and a wonderful senator from Maine. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our Senator, Angus King.
Thank you. First, I have an announcement. Bonnie, where's Bonnie? Have you checked? Did it pass?
It did, late last night.
Late last night, we passed a bill in Washington forbidding Danielle from retiring. You have to stay, Danielle. I have to tell you, being in this classroom like this brings back one of my most vivid memories. You notice I didn't say one of my best memories. I was sitting about right where you are in a first-year torts class in law school. And law school, at least when I went, was taught by the Socratic method. Questions from the professor. He didn't lecture much. He'd ask questions. So it was the whole half of my class, 90, 100 students. First year, you want to impress your friends. And the professor said, and he looked down his list and he said, "Mr. King." You stood up. Yes. "Mr. King, would you say that the case we're discussing is a good example of the rule in the Palsgraf case?" I had not read either the Palsgraf case or the case we were discussing. But I'm a risk taker. I calculated the odds, 50-50, and I said with great confidence, "Yes." Mr. Gregory, I can hear his voice to this day, said, "Mr. King, a shorter and more accurate answer would have been No. I tell that for you students to say you can survive utter humiliation. It's possible. I'm going to be talking about something today that many of you know a great deal about, and perhaps this is old news, but I want to put it into a context for you. And the reason is, it's been my experience in public policy that if you have agreement on the facts of a situation, you can generally get to the policy solution fairly easily. If you don't have agreement on the facts, it's almost impossible. And indeed, that's one of the problems in our country today is, I learned a new term this year called confirmation bias. And it's where we all seek out sources of information that tend to confirm our pre-existing views. And you have, if you're conservative, you watch Fox News. If you're liberal, you watch MSNBC. If you can't make up your mind, you watch CNN. But the point is, people get different versions of reality. And I think before we can even talk about solutions, we have to focus on what's the best determination we can make of the facts. And that's why I think it's important. Danielle mentioned taking some trips. A couple of years ago, I went to Pakistan on a trip to the Middle East, to India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and several other countries in that region, and walked into the room, and there was a very old guy, older than me even. I'm the world's oldest freshman, by the way, in the Congress. But I walked in, and the fellow said, there were two of us, he said, "I know why you gentlemen are here." And we said, "Why is that?" That was the first thing he said. He said, "Because one day of seeing is better than 30 days of reading." That's a pretty profound observation, and it's been my experience that when you see things and experience them, it's much more powerful and informative than if you are just reading about it. So, I've been to the Arctic a couple of times, 3 or 4 times now, and most recently this summer to Greenland. And that's essentially what I want to talk about, is what I saw and learned in Greenland that's relevant to the situation that we're in today. So I'm going to, let's see, we're going to, there we go. I could have done that. I'm a visual learner. And so it makes more sense to me if I can sort of see things. These are 3 graphs, and they're all on the same scale, the same time scale, about 450,000 years. And the first one is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, you'll often hear people talking about this, and they say, well, CO2 has varied, for millions of years. It goes up and down, and by the way, I have the same slide, which I'll show you in a few minutes, of going back 800,000 years. But what you see here is, yes, it does vary. It varies between about 280 parts per million, maybe up to 300, down to about 180. And this is 450,000 years. What's different is this. We're now at 400 parts per million, which we haven't been at for 5 million years. This is new. This is different. You see the pattern. And the up and down. But what's happened is it's shot up just in the last 150 years, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, so this tells us, there's no argument about this. This is just data. And then, but the question is, you see the CO2, we all breathe in CO2, plants do CO2. Odorless, tasteless gas, what difference does it make? Well, here's the next graph. This is global temperature over exactly the same period. Do you notice anything about these 2 graphs? Do you notice that they're almost identical? In other words, it's clear that there is a direct relationship between CO2 and temperature. But again, you might say, well, okay, so it's going to get warmer. We can play golf in November, and the ski season might not be so good, but we'll be able to grow more. We'll grow oranges in York County or something. You know, what difference does it make? Well, here's another one. This is sea level. This is sea level. Do you notice something similar? Sea level follows exactly the same pattern. Why? Because when it gets cold, water gets locked up in ice. When it gets warmer, water is released and it goes into the ocean. Now, I carry a card around in Washington. In fact, I think I've got one with me that I periodically. Whoop! No, that's the budget. I carry two. This is the budget. This is the budget in a nutshell. Let's see if I've got. Yeah, it's the same. This is the same. I'm going to put this on the screen, so don't strain your eyes. But this CO2. This is over 800,000 years, and then the other side is temperature and CO2, and it shows the correlation. In fact, to make it really easy, let's combine, wait a minute. Let's combine these three, and there they are. So that's data. For the life of me, I can't understand why this is so controversial. It's like arguing about whether or not water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit. No, I think it's 208. No, it's 214. It's 212. Anywhere in the universe, pi is 3.1416 anywhere. Speed of light is 186,000 miles a second. There's no argument about that. This is the same, just data, just science. So anyway, here's my little climate card. So you can see it, climate change in a nutshell. I've handed this to some very interesting people who just stuff it in their pocket. But it's the same, essentially it's the same data. This is CO2 only over a longer period of time. And then here, look what happens. This is the year 1000. It's still going along a fairly high level, about 1800. And then about 1850, look what happens. And this is where we're in uncharted territory. Now, what happened about 1850? We started burning things. We started burning fossil fuels in a big way. It's hard to look at this and say, well, people didn't have anything to do with it. There wasn't an outburst of volcanoes in 1850. So here's another, that's the other side of the card. That's the correlation between temperature and CO2. Okay. This is the CO2 emissions starting in, I hope this is going to work, starting at about 1700, running up to today in tons of CO2 into the atmosphere per year. What it shows is that in 1709, we released something like 2.5 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. Today, it's about 10,000 tons per year. I'm sorry, 10 million. In other words, it's gone from 2 to 10,000. That's what this movie shows. Unfortunately, you're going to see it. But the point is, the acceleration, and particularly in the last 50 years, of CO2 into the atmosphere is just dramatic. And it's the same thing that you saw on that graph of that upward trend. But the amount that we're releasing is just unbelievable. Now, what happens when it gets warmer or colder is reflected here. This was a big insight for me in Greenland. I don't know about you, but I think of the ocean as a kind of constant. You know, it's there. You go out to Portland Harbor and you see it, you know, go across to Bug Light or out into the ocean or down here, the salt marsh is what it is. The tides go up and down. It turns out it's only been that way for about 8,000 years. It has changed dramatically over time. And in fact, this is This is 24,000 years. 24,000 years ago, which isn't all that long ago. I mean, that's not a million, I'm not talking millions of years. 24,000 years ago, the ocean right off Maine was 390 feet shallower than it is today. 390 feet shallower. And why? Because of the glaciers. All that water was in the glaciers. Right here where we're standing, up until about 16,000, 17,000 years ago, there was 2 miles of ice. 10,000 feet of ice, right here. All of Maine was covered with ice. And that's where all the water was. So as the glaciers melted and retreated, the water went into the ocean, and the ocean level rose. This is today. This is 24,000 years ago. Now this is an interesting this is what the scientists call the meltwater pulse 1A. I don't know why they call it that, but if you do the calculation on this steep rise, the water rose about a foot a decade during that period. It was a time of, for whatever reason, accelerated melting, a foot a decade, and that was a rise of, I think, about 100 feet of ocean level. But the point is, the ocean as we know it isn't fixed. It's only been fixed at about 8,000 years, which is about human history. Prior to that, it's gone up and down, and in the last 24,000 years, it's changed dramatically. And here's a picture of the Gulf of Maine. Is it 10,000? Yeah, 10,000 years ago. Buried down here is Cape Cod. You can barely see it, but you see a lot of land out here. And this is a place that we all have heard of called Georges Banks. But you see, it's not underwater. It's a giant island. And prior to that, it was connected to Massachusetts and the Cape. And I have a friend named Bob Stenick. Many of you may know him. He's an ocean scientist. He's a diver and has spent his whole life studying this area. Out here, he says, when you dive, there are trunks of trees, and they've found mastodon teeth underwater in Georges Banks. And what he said to me was, Angus, mastodons were very poor swimmers. They walked out here. The point I'm making is the world changes, and the ocean is not a fixed quantity. Now, this comes to Greenland. I took this picture. You can see a little piece of the helicopter. This is a feature on the surface of the ice sheet. There are two or three things to notice about this. Notice how the ice this is the Greenland ice sheet. Notice how it's sort of dark. There's a blackish cast to a lot of this. This is the result of particulates from fossil fuel combustion that have blown on the air currents and turned the ice dark. Now, what do you suppose happens when ice gets dark? It melts faster. So just the color is important, but this is a geological feature called a moulin, M-O-U-L-I-N. I'd never heard of this before this summer. And what it is a hole. That hole is about the size of a football field. And this is a river of melting ice running across the top of the Greenland ice sheet and just pouring in. It's like a cataract. It's like a waterfall pouring into this hole. And this is what it looks like in a diagram. This is the moulin, and the hole goes down to the bottom, and this is about 10,000 feet, a couple of miles, and this is the bedrock. And the water is lubricating the ice underneath and helping it to slide toward the ocean. So it's what they call a feedback loop. It's it. And the water goes down, and it forms a kind of conveyor belt to move the ice toward the ocean. Now, here's the thing about Greenland. Remember I said we saw the ocean rising 390 feet? When the glaciers melted. If you think about it, the glaciers and Greenland and Antarctica are kind of the last remnants of the glaciers. the last big hunks of ice on Earth. Here's a piece of data. Greenland has within it 21 feet of sea level rise. Antarctica has 212 feet of sea level rise. The two together are about almost 250 feet of sea level rise. Now, neither one of those are going to melt entirely anytime soon. What's happening is that they are melting faster than ever and faster than anybody expected. On this trip, I was the Commandant of the Coast Guard, but there were two scientists with us. One who lives in Maine in the summertime, a guy named Bob Carell, who's a world-famous climate scientist. He even, you have all these degrees, but this guy has a peninsula in Antarctica named for him. That's pretty cool. And the other guy, John Englander, is a sea level rise expert, and they were shocked. When we saw this, they gasped. They said, we've been here 20 times. We've never seen one this big when we saw this Moulin. So here's another shot. I got this off of Instagram. I did get the permission. This is a National Geographic photographer, and this is one of those rivers. That's a view of a river of meltwater on the Greenland ice sheet headed down toward a Moulin. And to give you the scale, there's a scientist standing right there. So it's not quite the Kennebec, but it's a pretty substantial flow of water. In the last 4 years, enough water has melted in Greenland to fill a swimming pool the size of New York State, 23 feet deep. That's another way to visualize what's going on. Okay, where do we go with all this? What does this mean? And I kept pressing, what's really going to happen? The best estimate I've been able to find is we're going to have a foot of sea level rise in the next 7 to 15 years and a foot per decade thereafter. 6 feet by the end of this century. Now just think about that for a minute and what that means. What does it mean for Scarborough Marsh, for the marshes out here, for the Portland waterfront, but also what does it mean for Florida, for Miami, for New Orleans, for Savannah, for Bangladesh? And I'll talk about that in a minute. I hope they're wrong, but that's the current best estimate. And one of the interesting things about this, as I've dug into it, is every year they say it's going to be worse than they thought. In other words, it's getting worse. Here's another feedback loop. There are two others that I wanted to mention. One is that we all know the ice is melting in the Arctic Ocean. There's a lot less ice in the Arctic Ocean now than there was. And a cruise ship went through the Northwest Passage this summer. An outside cabin on that ship was only $120,000. Why weren't you there? Called the Crystal Serenity with like 1,000 passengers went through the Northwest Passage. That was unheard of even 10 years ago. And the so-called northern route along Russia is even clearer than the Northwest Passage, and the estimates are 5, 10, 15 years the Arctic is going to be essentially ice-free. Now, what does that mean? Here's an interesting, again, a bit of science. When the sun's rays hit ice and snow, 85% are reflected back into the atmosphere. When the sun's rays hit dark ocean, 85% of the sun's energy is absorbed in the ocean. So you see how it tends to build on itself as the ice melts. It gets warmer and the more ice melts, and then it gets warmer and more ice melts. The other piece is that there's a big geological feature in the Arctic called permafrost, which is essentially frozen ground. Unfortunately, in the permafrost is contained a great deal of methane. And methane is 40 times as potent as a greenhouse gas as CO2. So again, as the energy enters the Earth's surface and the permafrost melts and methane is released, it again accelerates this process. And I talked to the climate guys up at the University of Maine. The word they used, which really threw a chill down my back, was abrupt. we think of climate and geologic as millions of years. These things happen abruptly, and are very significant. And more and more scientists are starting to conclude that we're at or beyond a tipping point, that the changes are going to be significant. A foot a decade is dramatic. Already in Florida, in Miami, there's a new term called sunny day flood, where the streets of Miami Beach on a sunny day at a high tide have 6 to 8 or foot of water. That hasn't happened before. They are seeing it directly. And the problem in Florida that they face, it's one thing in New York City or in Maine where we have granite and essentially you can build things like seawalls. In Florida, the ground is porous limestone. It's like a sponge. So you can build a wall on top of it, but the water's just going to come up and seek its own level behind it. And that is a really engineering challenge that folks in Florida are facing. This is also Greenland. We landed about right here. This is called the Jakobshavn Glacier. It's the largest glacier draining the ice sheet. And by the way, this is another, I'm sharing with you what I've learned. The melting of the ice in the Arctic Ocean does not have anything to do with sea level rise. Why? Well, think about it. If you have a glass of your favorite beverage and it has a couple of ice cubes in it and the ice cubes melt, nothing happens, right? It's just because the water level has taken account of the mass of the ice cubes. But if you drop a new ice cube in, the water level goes up. So the problem isn't ice that's melting in the Arctic Ocean because that's leaving the sea level essentially as it is. The problem is the melting in Antarctica and Greenland, which is new ice from the land into the water, similar to what happened when the glaciers melted, and that's going to cause the sea level to go up. Now, if you think about it, the Greenland ice sheet is this huge hunk of ice, and the ice is gradually sliding down what amount to ice rivers, called glaciers, and they end up in the ocean. This is the west coast of Greenland. You can see the icebergs. They break up off the front, and there are the icebergs. They think, by the way, scientists think that the Titanic iceberg came from this glacier. What these lines are is where the face of the glacier has been in recent history. This is 1850. That's where everything behind it was solid, and that's where the front of the glacier was. This is where the front of the glacier is now. It has retreated as much in the last 12 years as in the prior 120 years. In other words, 10 times as fast. And again, that's what's so worrisome about this, is how fast this is all happening. This is, again, a measure of what's happening in the climate. This is the ice in the Arctic Ocean. And you can see, again, fairly steady up and down, and then in around, this is 1950, you see what's happening. Here's another way to look at the same data. This is the volume of ice in the Arctic. I find this one pretty shocking. In 1979, that's a representation of how much ice there was by volume. And this is where we are today. It's fallen by roughly 2/3 in, 45 years. So all of this answers the question is, what is happening? Here's the Crystal Serenity, largest cruise ship to navigate the Northwest Passage. And then finally, here's a little look at the Arctic looked at from above. This is the Northwest Passage along Canada. Here's Alaska, along the Canadian, down along the shore of Greenland, and down into the North Atlantic. This is the so-called northern route along the coast, essentially, of Russia. Okay. Who cares? Why? Why is this important? I spend about 50 or 60% of my time in Washington on national security. I just had an Intelligence Committee hearing yesterday on Russia. If I told you any more than that, I'd be in trouble. This is a national security issue. The Joint Chiefs of Staff have said climate change is a force multiplier. It's an accelerant of conflict. Russia, for example, is doing a lot of military buildup along this shoreline. Bases, troops, missiles, air bases. There's a whole new area of potential conflict here caused by the melting of the ice in the Arctic. The other piece from national security point of view is that we have bases all over America and all over the world, many of which are very, very subject to sea level rise. Norfolk, Virginia is one of those that's at great risk, and it also happens to be probably the largest concentration of our naval capacity in the world. And this is true all over the world. So just from the point of view of the cost of protecting or moving the infrastructure, it's a national security threat. But finally, here's the one that really worries me. This change is going to make parts of the world virtually uninhabitable. Temperatures in the band of area, particularly around the Middle East, are going to routinely start going into the 120 plus range. We're not evolved to live at that temperature. And with air conditioning, it just takes so much energy. And these are not countries that necessarily have the wherewithal to develop that, to use that much energy. And so we're going to see migration. Throughout world history, people have migrated because of changes in the climate. The estimates are that this will generate, and I can't put a time frame on it, 20, 30 years, between 200 million and 1 billion refugees. The Syrian conflict has generated maybe 1 million refugees. Maybe, I can't remember the exact number, 1.5 million. And it's turned Europe, and indeed to an extent our country, upside down. Multiply that by 200 of people who are going to be on the move because they can't live where they've traditionally lived. And think about the stress and strain that that's going to place on the developed world. And most of those people are going to be going north. And this is an enormous national security issue. And so that's number one. Number two, it's an enormous infrastructure issue. It's going to cost a ton of money to deal with this. Miami is spending $50 million right now to raise their roads a couple of feet so that they don't have this flooding. And, you know, think of water systems, sewer systems, roads. Down Easter, the tracks run right through Scarborough Marsh. I bet you they're not 5 feet above sea level, maybe a little bit more than that. Rail, you know, you name it. The cost, the dollar cost of dealing with this is going to be enormous. So I guess what I'm trying to get across is that this isn't a feel-good issue. This isn't, you know, it is an ethical and moral issue, but it's also a very practical issue. Just the cost of it, the national security threat, is going to be a huge problem. And let me end on the ethical question. I've said this on the floor of the United States Senate. I think all you need to know about environmental stewardship is contained in what I call the Maine rototiller rule. They wondered what I was talking about in Washington when I said that. But the Maine rototiller rule is pretty straightforward. It says, when you borrow your neighbor's rototiller in the spring to do your garden, you return it to them in as good a shape as you got it with a full tank of gas. That's all you need to know. We have the planet on loan. We don't own it. We own little pieces of it for our lifetime. But we have it on loan. we have it for a blink of an eye, and then it goes on to somebody else and somebody else and somebody else. And to me, it's unethical to destroy and compromise something that we don't own and that really belongs to other people that are yet unborn. That's just not, sorry, Susan. I call it's intergenerational theft for us to use up the capacity of the planet in ways that leave the problem to future generations. I mean, to me, it's just wrong. Plus, forget about that part. How about the idea that it took millions of years to make the oil and gas, and we're going to use it up in 200 years? How fair is that? It's like, Thanksgiving's coming up next week. Sit down at the table, the turkey comes in, Dad says, I'm having all of this. We're using in about 200 years what it took nature literally millions of years to make, and we're just saying, well, okay, our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, they'll do something else. Plus the fact that oil is a very miraculous product that can do all kinds of things. Burning it is not the highest and best use. It can be used to make things, and to burn it is really a waste of the qualities that it has. Plus the question of, do we have the right to use all of it for ourselves and just pass on the problem to the next generation? So I've really lightened up the mood here. Now, you all are going to spend the day talking about solutions, and there are lots of solutions, and I'm actually optimistic in some ways. And I'm not sure it's necessarily going to take legislation, because things like the drastic drop in the price of solar panels may be the solution without having to fight with Congress or the president or anything else. Solar panels have gone from $70 a watt to about $1 a watt in the last 30 years. The decline is dramatic. And I just read this morning that Tesla, Nissan, BMW, General Motors, and Daimler-Benz are all working on battery technology. And Elon Musk at Tesla just announced last week shingles for your house that make electricity. That's the breakthrough, in my view. Because right now, in Maine and other places, and my friends at Revision Energy have told me this, it costs more to install a solar panel on your roof than the solar panel costs. In other words, the installation cost is greater than the solar panel. So what if, instead of a solar panel, you just have ordinary shingles, which make electricity? So, and Elon Musk notes that 5 million houses a year in the U.S. are re-roofed. Re-roof with something that makes electricity, and the incremental cost isn't that much greater, then all of a sudden you've got a huge change in how we make energy. And then battery, you see, is the other piece of it, because the battery stores the energy during the day when you're making excess energy and releases it at night. The battery that they're now making can power a 4-bedroom house for a day with no input. That's where I think we're headed. And that's something that I'm working very much in Washington on, something called distributed energy, which is the right of people to make their own energy. And I have to tell you, it was really funny when I announced this bill. Of course, I took a lot of flack from utilities and fossil fuel people. The first people to come to my support was the Georgia Tea Party, because they viewed this as a personal sovereignty issue. People should have a right to, manage their own destiny. And so I think we're going to see more and more of that, and we're going to see, instead of the old model of the great big power plant, wires, house just takes and pays, we're going to see a much different situation where houses are going to be generators. And sometimes send power up. Sometimes they're going to bring power back. Again, from a national security point of view, it makes the grid less vulnerable because you can't knock it out with just hitting one place. So there are lots of aspects of this. So I do want to leave you with the idea that there's a lot happening just in the last couple of years, and the pace of that technological change is also accelerating. Can we stop global warming, and can we stop this process? Unfortunately, the scientists say no. That's the reality. What we can do, however, by lowering the use of fossil fuels, is slow it down and make it not as bad. And so there's no reason to give up and say, what's going to happen anyway, the heck with it, I'll put in a double-sized oil burner. So the amount of fossil fuel, but we also have to be thinking about adaptation. Anytime people build a building, build a road, build a water system, they've got to be thinking about how will this look with 2 or 3 more feet of water level. And the interior states, of course, the issues are things like drought and other changes. So let me end finally. Mary says I say finally too much, Danielle. It gets people's hopes up. Let me end by talking about our greatest president and change, because that's what we're talking about, change. We're talking about an enormous change just in our life. How do you deal with change? In 1862, in early December, Abraham Lincoln went to the Congress. And he went because the Congress was treating the Civil War as another political problem. Sounds like Congress, doesn't it? They were divided and bickering and not getting things done. And he was trying to get across to them that this is a new level of challenge and change that we have to figure out how to deal with. And at the end of his speech, December 2nd, 1862, he gave what I think is the greatest bit of guidance to us about how to deal with change that I've ever heard. Here's what Abraham Lincoln said. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and therefore we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. That's the key. We must disenthrall ourselves, think in new and different ways, and then we shall save our planet. Thank you. Great to be with you.
So I think that is a wonderful introduction to what we're going to be doing for the rest of the day. I hope that Senator King has impressed upon you the importance of this problem. And so now we're going to hear about some people that are starting to combat this climate change and are going to hopefully decrease the effects of what we have already done and what we're going to do in the future. So our first speaker is Professor Thomas Teutenberg. He's the Mitchell Family Professor of Economics Emeritus at Colby College. He is a former president and a current fellow of the Association of Environmental and Resource Economists. Dr. Teutenberg has published over 100 articles, essays, and books, including the most widely used textbook in the field. Over the last 30 plus years, Dr. Teutenberg has worked with the United Nations, several foreign governments, organizations within the U.S. to design and evaluate nonpartisan, market-based policies to control pollution, including carbon pricing systems. And again, we're going to have all the speakers speak, and then at the end, we're going to have some time for some questions. So I'd like to introduce Professor Teutenberg.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by saying a big special thanks to UNE for hosting this very timely meeting, and also for being very gracious hosts, which I have found. Both the international community and the United States have taken some very important first steps to try to deal with some of the problems that you just heard about. For the international community, these include the Paris Agreement, which involves most countries of the world now agreeing to reduce their emissions. It includes the Kigali Agreement, which is an agreement to phase out a very powerful greenhouse gas. And for the United States, it includes things like the Clean Power Plan, the Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards, and the recent heavy-duty truck regulations. Good. But the basic math is inescapable. If we are to meet the international targets set up to avoid these serious climate impacts, we must do more to expand the scope of what we're doing to a wider set of emission types and a wider set of geographic areas. This will not be easy. The president-elect has stated his desire to roll back most, if not all, of these programs. You can read in the press that if he is successful, staying within the temperature targets that are designed to minimize the most serious climate impacts could be impossible. Does that mean game over? Perhaps it is time for us to go back to the way we felt in World War II, when one of the famous sayings was, the difficult we do immediately. The impossible takes a little longer. Could that saying apply to climate change policy? Throughout my career, a quote from the Roman poet Ovid always served me extremely well. He said, "Dripping water hollows out stone, not through force, but through persistence." Even dripping water, however, has to have a path to hollow out stone. Do we have a path where persistence might prove effective? I believe we do. First, if you follow the polls, the attitudes are changing. Contrary to the climate change is a hoax rhetoric you hear during the campaign, nonpartisan polls, such as those by the Pew Center, revealed that majorities of American voters in both parties now support some action on climate change. Apparently, the conversations that go beyond closed doors are not the same conversations you hear in a campaign that tries to maximize differences. One reflection of this change, which struck me, was that you can now see some conservative think tanks, such as the Cato Institute in Washington, have now taken up what is known as the lukewarming movement. And that actually has a double meaning. But this is a movement, however, for my purposes, the reason I'm interested in it is this is a movement that acknowledges that climate change is happening, acknowledges that human activity is a cause, and finally acknowledges that action to control this threat is merited. That is very different than climate change as a hoax. There is still some differences. They feel that the speed with which, the big difference now is over what's called climate sensitivity, and that is how fast do these things move, and they think it moves slower than the scientific community does. But for my purposes, I just want to get the conversation going, and I think that that's movement that's useful. Second, this increasing acceptance of both the basic science and the need for action by members of both parties is beginning to shift the nature of the conversation from whether action is needed to how are we going to pull it off. To my mind, this is an important shift in focus that allows us to begin to have the conversations we need to have to get enough votes and enough opinion to do that. For reasons that I will expand upon shortly, I believe the best chance we have to make progress in the expansion involves something called carbon pricing. To be sure we're all on the same page, let me be clear about what that is and how it can be implemented. At its simplest, Carbon pricing is, as it sounds, putting a price on carbon emissions. The question is, how do you do it? And the answer is you do it in either of two ways, normally. A cap and trade program, which is exactly like our own regional greenhouse gas initiative, which you are about to hear more about, here in Maine and the northeastern states, or a carbon fee or tax, which you will also hear more about. Analytically, speaking as a professor now, these are mirror images of each other. Because what the cap and trade does is it sets a cap on emissions and says you can't do any more emissions than this. And then it lets the market, so the government sets the cap, and then the market determines the price that's necessary to achieve that goal. The carbon fee is exactly the opposite. The government sets the tax on emissions and lets the market decide how the emission reductions respond. Is carbon pricing merely a kind of neat sounding but ultimately untested idea? Absolutely not. Shame on you for even thinking that. I'm still a little, when I started my career, that is the question I got most when I was talking about some of these policies, which at that time weren't anywhere, and people would say, well, you know, this is just an academic idea. What good is that? It's not just an academic idea anymore, folks. It's being used. A recent World Bank report notes that the share of global emissions covered by carbon pricing has increased threefold just over the last decade. Now 40 national jurisdictions and over 20 cities, states, and regions are already putting a price on carbon as of 2016. And listen to, there are lots of states and areas coming on board now, and listen to two of them. The first one is China. China currently has a number of pilot cap and trade programs that it's running, and it is promised by 2017 it will have a national program running. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced that provinces have until 2018 to develop their own own pricing system. He hasn't specified what kind. And if they don't do that, he will impose the price himself on them. As someone who spent his whole career working with both Republicans and Democrats, as well as their international counterparts, I believe that carbon pricing offers more common ground for mutually beneficial discussion than is conventionally believed. So let me try to convince you of that a bit. First, part of this common ground is derived from the inherent characteristics of carbon pricing programs. One, they're cost effective. That means there is no policy or combination of policies that can achieve the reductions we need at a lower cost. Now, it turns out that both parties sort of like low costs. And they like to not waste resources when we're achieving these goals. And you know, one of the interesting things about this is ExxonMobil now has publicly stated that if we are going to have a carbon control in this country, they want it to be a carbon tax. I think that's a pretty interesting step, a pretty interesting player. Second, it levels the field for energy choices. As any basic economic course will tell you, when a major part of the costs is passed on to somebody else, the market's biased and it does not make efficient decisions. The same textbooks frequently point out that because of climate change, that's true for the energy market. Now, many prominent conservative economists, these are economists, but they're conservative economists, and they've done things like be the Secretary of Treasurer for Reagan. They were Bush's chief of his Council of Economic Advisors. They now believe and support carbon pricing, particularly carbon taxes, because its implementation would eliminate this failure of the market and would therefore allow the market to be more used for some of these problems, which is what they would like to see. It would eliminate some of the most serious deficiencies of the market. And second of all, the senator talked about innovation. But if you talk to an economist about innovation, we know that the innovation markets are equally biased from the energy markets. And so if we want to stimulate the right amount of that innovation, or the maximum amount of that innovation, we need to get those incentives right. And carbon pricing corrects those incentives. In addition to these characteristics, carbon pricing has several flexible design features that can increase the size of the common ground without interfering with the things I just said. In particular, it can use the revenue raised from carbon pricing to assure that the cost and benefit impacts of the policy are shared fairly. And listen to this, it can do it without making the government bigger. And if you don't think that matters in this debate, you've got a bit more research to do. And finally, it can be used to promote jobs and the economy. Listen to what you learn from the next speakers about RGGI when you think about carbon pricing as being, in the press, a job killer. You can design a policy that way if you want to, but that's not the way most policies are designed. I can't go into detail about how these things take place because I don't have time. I'm going to respect the minutes. But if you ask a question during the discussion period, I'd be happy to respond to that. The next three speakers will give you details about how our local cap and trade program works. And then the final speaker in our group will talk to you a bit about British Columbia, who is a good example of a carbon tax state, a revenue neutral carbon tax state. So the million-dollar question, and as the senator said, now I'm in my close, as the million-dollar question is, Tom, suppose you are right. And this path, given persistence on our part, could lead to an expanded use of carbon pricing in the US and elsewhere around the globe. Would that change occur fast enough and allow us to reach the desired temperature targets soon enough to prevent serious climate impacts? To be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. We do have one major help, however. The Kigali Agreement, which you may or may not be familiar with, phases out this very powerful HFC greenhouse gas. And everyone says about that agreement that it buys us some time. Boy, can we use that time. I can't guarantee it that it will give us enough time, but I intend to give it my best shot, and I hope you'll give it your best shot. Thank you very much.
So we are, as always at conferences like this, we are running behind. This is probably the first time I'm going to say it, but not the last. So I'd like to move right into Dylan Voorhees. He's the Climate and Clean Energy Project Director of the Natural Resources Council of Maine. He's going to give us an overview of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Inventory. Mr. Voorhees has led NRCM's involvement in a variety of energy and climate issues, including adoption of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, wind power and solar energy policy, energy efficiency programs, laws and funding, promotion of electric vehicles, and efforts to combat dirty fuels such as tar sands, and general education for the public and policymakers about the risks of climate change. So, again, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dylan Voorhees.
Thank you very much, and I'll try and contribute to catching us up a little bit and use a little bit less than 10 minutes. So again, my name is Dylan Voorhees. I work for the Natural Resources Council of Maine, as you heard. NRCM is a membership-based environmental advocacy organization, the largest in the state, and we work through science and policy advocacy and engaging citizens in the state to make change happen. We work in a wide variety of environmental issues, including for a long time climate change and clean energy issues. We heard a lot this morning from Senator King that seems pretty persuasive that the climate science is a real, that the changes are happening, and hopefully leading us to some agreement that our task is to do something about it. We recently polled Maine people about some attitudes about climate change and clean energy. And one of the questions we asked people was, when do you think global warming will have a negative impact on the state of Maine? And we gave them a bunch of choices. We said, it's already happening in 5 to 10 years, in 10 or 25 years, in 50 to 100 years, or it will never have a negative impact on Maine. And 60% of Maine people said global warming is already having a negative impact on Maine. 60%, a clear majority. It is true across political parties. We ask people what your political affiliation is. It's true across demographic groups. If you ask the same question nationally, it's about 40%. We here in Maine get it, and we're seeing it, and we're seeing our personal experiences converge with what the science is telling us. So the question is, what are we going to do about it? And we have not been idle. I'm very happy to say in Maine and in this region we have been leaders. I'm going to talk about an initiative that we have tackled in the Northeast over the last decade or so, and I'm going to start with the results, which are power plant emissions from the Northeast states are down 35% over the last decade or so. Through this initiative, we have seen and this is from Maine to Maryland, a $1.3 billion net increase in our gross state products, so a net increase in our economic activity. Energy costs, because of how we've designed this program, are projected to be $2.9 billion lower than if we did not have this initiative. So that's pretty remarkable. The Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, is a remarkable cooperative agreement among states. It is a market-based system to put a hard limit on carbon emissions from power plants. And I'm going to try and repeat this as many times as possible, so if there's a number one takeaway that you leave the room for. We have lowered carbon emissions, strengthened our economy, and we are paying less in energy costs. So please, I'm counting on all of you to not buy the story that acting on climate is going to hurt our economy or make us pay more in energy. It is factually not the case when we look at RGGI in our region. It's because of leadership that we've seen this, and it's really a privilege to be up here with Senator King as well, because he's one of the leaders. This program started with the Republican governor of New York, George Pataki, who took Reagan-era ideas about market-based regulations and put them into place in the form of RGGI. RGGI was virtually unanimously supported in the Maine legislature when we decided to join almost 10 years ago. It has critical features like a hard limit on how much carbon can be emitted. And at the end of the day, that's the bottom line. We need to actually put fewer tons in the atmosphere. And so it works by limiting the total amount of carbon that power plants can emit. The other feature, and I'll just speak to it briefly because I think the following speakers will talk in much more tangible terms about it, but what we've done is we've required power plants to pay to emit carbon. And we have used that revenue to invest in energy efficiency. And so we've saved $5 or so for every dollar we've gotten from those power plants. And that is why this program is a net benefit to our economy and to energy prices. It's a market-based program, and so it is sending a signal to investors about the kinds of energy that we want in the future. And it says, basically, if you invest in lower carbon renewable energy sources, you will be more profitable. and that is really important. It's really important to send a clear, predictable message into markets to get the right investments for our future. The last thing I really want to say is that the RGGI states, and again, this is Maine down to Maryland, skipping over New Jersey, and a certain governor of New Jersey withdrew several years ago, but it's really the Northeast states, and they are in the process, as they do periodically, of reviewing RGGI and looking at how's it working, can we make improvements, where do we need to go next. And one of the things that they are looking at is what should the limit on carbon be between the years 2020 and 2030. We've only decided that up to 2020, and so it's sort of a blank slate. And they're looking at a variety of options for the states in terms of what that carbon limit should be. And how quickly can we reduce carbon emissions in that time period. If we look backwards in time over the last 10 years or so, power plant carbon emissions have gone down around 5% a year. It's been very varied, but it's about 5% a year, which is a pretty remarkable achievement. And we and many others think that's the number that we should use going forward. We should at least be doing 5%, but there are different opinions about that, and that's something that, that the states are going to discuss. 5% a year would also be consistent with our overall goals on climate change. And Governor LePage, who we don't agree with on a lot of things, last year signed a commitment or a goal to reduce carbon emissions by the year 2030 by at least 35 to 45% below current levels. That's a good goal. It's consistent with what we need to do according to science. And using RGGI at around that level would help us meet those objectives. It's also something that's overwhelmingly supported by Maine people. And that poll I mentioned earlier, we asked people, what would you think about requiring power plants to emit less carbon at about 5% less each year? And 77% of Mainers said that's a good idea. They support that. 60% of them said they strongly support that. So again, true across demographics and ideology. So that's really important. That's decisions that are being made right now. There are opportunities for you to use your voice to let the Department of Environmental Protection or the Public Utilities Commission or the Governor's Office know what you think about that. I encourage you to learn more and visit NRCM's table out there. There's a petition you can sign that will go to those people, and then we'll send it to Senator King and Senator Collins just so they know as well. This is what leadership we expect in Maine and the region. So learn more, tell your friends. We are acting on climate, we are reducing carbon emissions, we are strengthening our economy, we are creating new jobs, we are paying less for energy as a result. We can have our cake and eat it too, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I look forward to some of your questions. I think there's a lot of soul searching about what's going to happen on the national level, but the one thing I can tell you is that Maine and the region are opportunities for progress, and our voices can be very effective there. So I look forward to a discussion with you the rest of the morning. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Michael Stoddard. He's the Executive Director of Efficiency Maine, and he's going to talk about RGGI and Efficiency Maine's home weatherization program. He is, Efficiency Maine is the independent administrator for energy efficiency programs in Maine. Its mission is to lower the cost and environmental impacts of energy in Maine by promoting cost-effective energy efficiency, conservation, and alternative energy resources to help customers save electricity, natural gas, and heating fuels throughout all sectors of the Maine economy. So I'm turning it over to Michael.
Thank you very much. We okay? Good. I'm losing my voice a little bit, and so the microphone is going to come in very handy. Well, Dylan was a nice transition, and Tom before him from what I found to be a little bit discouraging news from the Senator. It's not new news, it's just sort of confirmation of things we've been hearing all along. But I think there is some good news. news, and I think you should be encouraged by what Dylan said and what I have to share with you. There are things you can do, and I think this is going to work out. You're going to do it. You're going to make this happen, and it's going to be okay. The goals that the scientists have been telling us ever since Al Gore's movie came out, and even before that, was that we need to reduce our carbon emissions by about 75% by the middle of this century. That's a lot, I acknowledge, but think about this. The light bulbs that you used 5 years ago used 100 watts. The LED lights that you buy now when you go to Home Depot use 12. That's more than 75%. Ta-da, you did it. Okay, so step one, get rid of all the old lights and put in all the new lights. America is great at one thing in particular, and that is buying stuff. We buy stuff. We love stuff. We buy it all the time. The next time you go buy something, get the good stuff. And our programs are designed to help entice you to make that purchasing choice, because it would be a little bit cheaper to buy the old stuff that's not quite as good. But I'm asking you to buy the good stuff, and if you do, sometimes we have a rebate or a discount or something of a few bucks to help make it worth your while. And just one more encouraging thought for you. A heat pump, which is this crazy magic physics of like running a refrigerator or an air conditioner in the opposite direction that makes heat from electricity. It's 300% efficient. It takes 1 unit of electricity and gives you 3 units of heat. Now, you've lost some energy along the way from the power plant to your house, but once it's in your house, this is super efficient. And it's vastly cleaner than the traditional fuels we've been using to heat our homes. So there's tremendous opportunity to save carbon from switching to heat pumps. And in Maine, by February of this coming year, we will have installed 25,000 heat pumps in the last 3 years in this state. So we're on the right path. Vehicles, that's the other big one, right? If you had a car that used to get 20 miles a gallon, that's what most cars averaged about 10 years ago or a little before that. But, you know, a lot of us are driving Priuses. You can buy a Nissan Leaf used from Adam Lee up in Topsom. It's all electric. I mean, it's going to cover 80% of the driving you have to do around town and groceries and all that stuff. This is totally affordable. The next time you go buy stuff, get the good stuff. All right, so I'm assigned to talk to you about the residential heating reduction program that Efficiency Maine runs with the dollars that we get from the program Dylan just described, called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. I got to point this at something. This is just the last 3 years of results, but in the last 3 years, this particular program called the Home Energy Savings Program invested $4 million in the first year, almost $8 million in the second year, and just about $6 million last year, to help Mainers weatherize their homes, put insulation in, and install high-efficiency heating systems. You can see that we touched over 20,000 homes during that period. So there are 550,000 homes in the state, and this is not quite going to get the job done in the time frame we have in mind, but it is starting to transform the marketplace and build up an entire marketplace of service providers who make a living doing this. And it's also got stores and customers thinking about the next time they're going to make a home improvement. Maybe they ought to focus on things that will reduce their energy use and, by extension, reduce their carbon emissions. This is the activity that happened on a monthly basis over those 3 years. And it doesn't matter what the dates are, and the amounts on the left are the dollars that we spent in rebates to customers buying high-efficiency heat pumps, putting insulation in their attics and in their basements and so forth. What's important about this is that we are using our country's fondness for markets and buying stuff and selling stuff to create a marketplace and transform the marketplace. That's a lot of financial activity, and those are just the dollars that we are contributing from Reggie. The homeowners are contributing $3 to $4 for every dollar that we put in. So we're spurring economic development. We're adding jobs to Maine that are good paying jobs that are sustainable, and we're making people's home energy bills go down dramatically. This is a listing of all the different kinds of measures that we've been promoting with these dollars and the quantities we've done. And you see, 30,000, almost 31,000 different kinds of projects in the last few years. So a lot of it is heating systems, like there are the heat pumps, 16,000 just through this particular program. You see the pellet boilers down here, which is a whole house boiler system just running on pellets. And then these are the building envelope measures up here. About 10,000 people did projects on their building envelopes. So we have a long way to go, but I just think you should keep in mind that start with your house. And after you get done with your house, if you're under 40, get your mom and dad to do this. If you're over 40, get your kids to do this. And we're going to get it done. I also want to mention that census data shows that about 14% of Mainers, 13 and change, live at or below the poverty line. And they don't have as easy access to buying stuff as the rest of us. And so we have set aside 10% of the revenues that we have from this whole revenue stream of Reggie to invest in weatherizing and heating systems in low-income homes. So just as an example, from last year, we did about 200 heat pumps in low-income homes. A whole bunch of those were in some homes that we worked with in partnership with a bunch of the Rustic Band of Micmacs, the Maliseets, the Passamaquoddies, et cetera. And their heating costs, by our estimates, just from those projects, will be reduced by $2.5 million. So over the life of those measures, not all in 1 year. But that's, as Tom was saying, that's economically driven, makes tons of sense to do kind of thing that we can do with these programs if we keep running them the way we have. We're also now introducing in what we call enhanced rebates. So if a regular rebate that we would offer would be $500 or something like that for the attic insulation, we will double or triple that for the low-income homes. So we're trying to get them to get some skin in the game, but also make it more accessible. So I just wanted you to get a flavor of what we can do with these funding streams when they're available. We're still using market mechanisms. We're still enticing people to make the good choice and buy the good stuff. But when they do that, they're not only going to be helping the local economy and their own pocketbook, but they will certainly be reducing carbon emissions to get us towards that target. Thanks.
So thank you, Michael. So our next speaker is Andrew Goldberg. He is the Energy Project Manager for Hannaford Brothers Company, and he's going to talk about Reggie and Efficiency Maine helping Maine businesses lower energy costs. So Andrew Goldberg is the Energy Project Manager at Dalhousie America, the parent company of Hannaford Brothers Supermarkets. He manages energy-efficient project work in Hannaford's 189 locations, ranging from efficiency upgrades to distributed generation projects, fuel conversions, as well as utility and efficiency agency relationships. So again, let's welcome Andrew Goldberg.
All right, thank you. Just to make a quick connection here, because I'm not used to speaking to a group of this size. Who here has been in a grocery store? Awesome. In a Hannaford supermarket? Even better. Okay, now I feel a lot more comfortable. So, make sure I can do this right. So, quick overview, about 189 stores in 5 states. I do a lot of my work, it's all with efficiency projects, and work with the utilities. We have utilities like Efficiency Maine and most of the states that we operate in. About 60 stores in Maine, all with great energy efficiency opportunities. And just to put in perspective, our average store, and I looked it up the other day, 1,000 square feet. So, do it. So, little structure of my department and how it works. So, I work on the energy team, and we're in the same group as the purchasing department, facilities, construction, and we focus primarily on installing efficiency measures across the chain. We have some other energy projects we work like with some of the previous speakers where we work with our sustainability department. So we install electric charging stations. Not necessarily an efficiency project, but a sustainability project and something that's also very important to our company and our community. So Hannaford's also, as you mentioned, owned by Delhaize America, now Ahold Delhaize. So we have partners in the Mid-Atlantic area and throughout New England with Food Lion and with Stop and Shop. So we do our projects independently of each other, but can consult across and get best practices and ideas from each other. So as far as the return on investments, I get my capital for doing the projects internally, and the capital basically comes from doing it as a financial investment. So I'm going to my senior leadership and saying, I want to install this product, I want to upgrade this light, I want to make these changes, and I can do it on a 4-year return, a 3-year return, a 2-year return. So the funds that we get from places like Efficiency Maine with the funding from RGGI is hugely important for 2 reasons. One, it's saying, okay, upgrading these lights would be a 5-year payback and I might not get my funding. Now with the incentive, it's going to be a 3-year payback and I can get it. Or you could look at it the other way and say, I have X amount of dollars to do these projects and that's going to afford me to do 3 stores. Now with the incentive funding, I can do 5 or 6 stores. So it just helps us spread it efficiently sooner. So as I mentioned, the ongoing relationship with Efficiency Maine, we primarily do our projects in 2 different buckets. One is going to be called a prescriptive rebate, and one is a custom rebate. So a prescriptive rebate is very similar to what Michael was talking about. Install these lights, get this rebate back, just like the heat pump that's now in my home. Thank you very much. So the custom rebate is going to be where you have your more complex projects, and you're going to be saying, okay, we have we have all these lights that we want to upgrade, but we want to change the dimming controls, we want to change the settings on them, we want to adjust the hours they're on, change not just a 1-for-1 fixture, we want to pull out 200 fixtures and put 150 of them in, and we want to get incentivized for using less lights to do the same job instead of using more lights and getting more rebates. So those are our custom projects, and working with Efficiency Maine using the RGGI funds, we're able to do things like take a group of stores, put them together, and say, here's the savings from 6 stores together or 11 stores together, and do it as one large project. Okay, so, and the other thing we also get assistance with Efficiency Maine, I'll talk about this later in the presentation, is that they help us with pilots and metering. So frequently you go in and you might know what the wattage is on these lights, but you have something on motion sensors, you have something that's on refrigeration control. It's very complex to know exactly how much energy you're going to save ahead of time. So we'll get assistance in finding out what's the savings going to be before we do the project, or metering it afterwards and finding out, did we actually hit what we expected to. So now this is the point where I throw a bunch of pictures up so you can look at the screen instead of me, and I'll just talk about what we do here. So quick example, the lights you see on the top of the pictures there, those are lamp T8 fixtures with a specular reflector. It's basically a mirror above it. Those replaced these old 8-lamp T8 fixtures. So just a quick, simple project where we got, twice as much. We use half the wattage to get the same amount of light doing a one-for-one conversion. And these are all things that we make every effort not to actually reduce any conditions. We don't want the store managers, we don't want the customer to say it feels like you're cutting energy. We want it to say it's an upgrade, but at the same time using less energy. So very important there. This project was one that we had set up with Efficiency Maine that did exactly, it was in 2014. We did six stores, combined the savings. We had over 300,000 kilowatt hours of annual savings between those combined. You couple that with being able to replace the lights instead of relamp them and have all the savings from that too, and have the improved conditions in the store. So it was a great project. Just another shot of those. So another one that's very popular. This is more of a prescriptive project. These are refrigerated case lights that go in the refrigerated case doors for the freezers and the coolers. As you shop and you see these lights, you probably don't think about the fact that upgrading these lights gets you a double benefit. So you're putting a light that produces a small amount of heat in a refrigerated space. So at home, the light shuts off in your refrigerator when you shut the door. We all assume it does. In a grocery store, you can go home and check. In a grocery store, it doesn't turn off. So that light stays on except for when the store is closed. Those T8 fluorescents stay on all day long. They're putting heat out in the case. That increases the load on the refrigeration equipment, increases the electric load. We take that and we do a prescriptive rebate with Efficiency Maine. Put in, it's hard to see on the actual image there. The one on the right, you can see just on the edge. We put in these LED sticks made by a local company manufacturing them in Portland. Install the LED sticks, which put out less heat. I mean, just reaching in those coolers and putting your hand on the old fluorescents, you'd feel the heat being put in there. You put those in, you save on the cost and not having to relamp those fixtures every 3 years. You save on the heat not going in to fight the refrigeration equipment, and you get a much better quality, mentioned, significantly reduced wattage of the fixtures. Now, you have the expense of the fixtures, you have the expense of the labor, and occasionally you have the expense of having to move shelves or product to do it. So it's not the cheapest product, and like Michael said, obviously you want to buy the good stuff and make it work. So this is something that could easily be a 4 or 5 year threshold of whether we can do it or not. With the utility incentive money, it becomes sometimes a 2 or 3 year payback and becomes a slam dunk where I barely even need approval to move forward with the project. So another example of one, this is one that we're actually have in progress right now, which is a great project. So you're used to seeing these open refrigerated display cases. I've been with Hannaford for 15 years. I've been in grocery stores for a lot longer than that. I've never understood why anyone ever decided to build a refrigerated display case with the door open. Wouldn't leave the door open on your fridge all day long at home. Someone thought it was a good idea and it looked cool, I guess. So someone said, okay, let's at least put night curtains on these things. And there was a prescriptive rebate for doing these. And that's great. So when the store is closed, frequently from like 6 a.m., assuming that we're not stocking the shelves during that time, and we rely on the fact that the employee will actually pull these down, which happens most of the time. There's not a lot of R value in those shades. So it's something, but much better than that is putting doors on those cases. So you take a refrigerated display case, which might have like a 20-year life, and the case is 10 or 12 years old. I know that case is going to be there for another 10 years. So you take something like the zero energy doors, and we retrofit a frame on there, and I'll show you the process as that goes. We put the frame on there, we put the doors on there, the frame comes with the LED lights, we pull the fluorescents out. We have enormous savings from these, but again, very expensive projects. Here's a quick left and right before and after shot of the same exact set. So just a quick, some of the numbers here on this one. Let me find it. Okay, so you have the electric savings from not having to run the compressors as much to run the refrigeration. Anyone want to take a guess what it takes to run the compressors for running those cases versus these? Just shout it out. Less. Pretty close. So about 25%. We can look at the images on the refrigeration equipment, see how much they're running. So that takes about 25% of the load of this, which means when we're building new stores, you can put in a lot smaller refrigeration equipment in the compressor room when you're putting doors with cases. So when you're shopping and you see open cases, you can always ask, say, hey, why don't you guys have doors on those? So, so it takes about a quarter of the energy. That's just the refrigeration equipment to run the cases. Now you have all the cold air that's not spilling out into the aisle that was here, because everyone's experienced that, like, it's the middle of July and you're walking down here in shorts and flip-flops and you're freezing because you're standing next to an open dairy case. So about 10 or sometimes even 12 months a year, we're heating our stores with propane or natural gas or heat reclaim from the refrigeration equipment. But again, we're doing something to heat in the stores. When you have open refrigerated cases, your heat load is incredibly higher than you have closed doors. So that's propane and natural gas that we're saving by not having to heat that area. Then on top of that, you obviously have the electric savings from the LED lights, very similar to the previous projects. In addition, you also have the product quality aspect of not having your food get warmer, colder, warmer, colder. This is another one that we did locally, just an example that it's not just dairy and meat. You know, you can obviously put doors in front of everything. There's been a stigma in merchandising for a long time that doors restrict sales. We've proven otherwise. If I go in the store to buy beer, I'm not going to change my mind because I have to open a door. So, just another couple quick shots here of that. Here's the installation, again with some pictures for viewing here. So frames go in, custom frames. This was one in Brewer, Maine that we did a couple months ago. Doors go in, lights go on, and done. This one, we skipped the case on the right because of the emergency exit, and I was concerned about clearances, so it was a perfect example to show before and after in the same store. This is something I love to show internally when people say, oh, well, it makes it hard to see the product. The way we build these now, on the left-hand side, with the doors taking the canopy off, you actually get more viewing area of the product than on the old ones. So you actually say if you want to sell more product, put a door on it. Also threw in about the motion sensors. Again, a local company that we work with, and we install the motion sensors on the cases so that when you're not in the aisle, the light's not on. Efficiency Maine, again, was supportive in us doing a test to see with light loggers, these little gizmos they'd stick in there to see when the light was on and when it was off. We used to have an 8-minute delay on these, so 8 minutes of no motion, it would turn the light off. We did 20 light loggers in 3 different stores in Maine, and found that they were off 43% of the time. We had always assumed 20 in our applications to go conservative, so 43%. We took the 8-minute delay and did some tests and went with a 1-minute delay, and we got no negative feedback at all. We checked with the store managers, no one noticed. The whole point is whether the light turns on after you leave the aisle or 8 minutes after you leave the aisle doesn't really matter because you're not in the aisle. So we changed it from 8 to 1. I'm curious now if we do another test what that 43% is going to go up to, because not just the energy savings, but from our facility and maintenance side, the less those lights are on, the longer they last. So if we can go, you know, basically when those refrigerated cases come out, we'll die before the lights do. So just another example of some of the settings and how we can even do these on old cases. So I think I'm probably close on my 10 minutes. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So we now have our final speaker before we're going to break for the panel where you can ask all of the speakers questions. The final speaker is Adam Pontius. He is a political consultant and the chapter leader of Citizens Climate Lobby. He lives in Portland, Maine, and he has experience in field organizing and campaign development, as well as a background in research and library work. He's the chapter leader of Portland, Maine chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, grassroots advocacy organization focused on national policies to address climate change. So please welcome Adam.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for staying the entire time. I also want to thank University of New England for putting this on, and NRCM and Senator King for co-sponsoring it with us. I'm going to be speaking today about Citizens Climate Lobby. We are a nonpartisan grassroots advocacy organization that's now international, and we're also active in all 50 states. We've got 3 chapters here in Maine, and we're about 2 different things. First, we're about passing effective climate change reform, in particular focusing on passing a revenue-neutral carbon fee and dividend. And then we're also all about empowering everyday citizens to take part in grassroots advocacy and to find agency in the political process. So let me break down our policy a bit. So a revenue-neutral carbon fee and dividend is a policy that would effectively price carbon so that it reflects its true environmental costs, and so that clean and alternative energy can actually compete in the marketplace, compete both for investors so that capital formation is easier, so that we have more companies that are actually focusing on creating green products, and then also to make it so that those products are cheaper so that consumers can actually buy those products. Right now, a couple of the speakers have spoken about the fact that it's kind of easier to do the wrong thing. It's easier to buy something, it's cheaper to buy something that ends up using up more energy. Well, we want to change the dynamics in the marketplace, and the way to do that is by putting a price on carbon. So here's how it would work. We would go ahead and put a fee on anything that emits carbon as far upstream economically as possible. So what that means is when you have a source of energy that emits carbon, we go ahead and we put a fee on it, either when it comes out of the wellhead, if it's something that we create domestically, or at the port of entry or at the pipeline of entry, if it's something that we import in. And that fee would start out at $15 per ton of CO2 equivalent. So what that translates to in terms that you can understand as a consumer is around 15 cents per gallon. That fee would raise at a rate of $10 per ton or 10 cents per gallon until we get down to 10% of 1990 levels of carbon emissions. And the other part of that is trying to make it politically durable and bipartisan, and that's where the revenue neutral and the dividend part comes in. So a lot of the knock on climate policies is that they're bad for the economy or that they grow the government. That tends to be the problem when we try and bring something from the climate change community, the people who are really focusing on solutions, out to a broader range of people where this maybe isn't their first priority. I mean, their first priority tends to be economic growth or trying to make sure that government isn't ballooning. By making this revenue neutral, so that means no money is actually going into the general fund for Congress or a legislature, that means that it's decoupling our issue from the larger issue of economic growth. And by giving all of that money back to people in the form of monthly dividend, all the money that the Treasury Department collects from that carbon fee ends up getting distributed out through checks, we make sure that it's not going to negatively affect economic growth. And this actually works. We would not be the first place that would do this. British Columbia, as Tom mentioned, actually enacted this policy in 2008. It was enacted by a conservative government and enacted slightly different than the way that we envisioned, but in a way that was still revenue neutral. Ended up giving all of the money that it collected back to the people in the form of tax rebates and then lower income tax rates and lower corporate tax rates. And it's actually achieved a fair amount of success. According to The Economist in 2014, the per-person consumption of carbon-emitting fuels was down by 16% in British Columbia. And to give you some perspective, in the rest of Canada that year, personal consumption was up 3%. And what's more, British Columbia's economy has stayed competitive compared to the rest of the country and now has some of the most competitive personal income tax rates and most competitive corporate tax rates. And according to the studies we've seen, that same policy can be implemented here in the United States with the same effect. In 2013, the Regional Economic Modeling Institute ended up releasing a study called a REMI study that looked at how this would look if it were implemented across the United States. And what it found is that the 20-year effects would be a 50% reduction in carbon emissions below 1990 levels, an addition of 2.8 million jobs, and then also it would result in saving the lives of 230,000 people who might otherwise die because of problems with air pollution. So maybe we can finally put to bed the saddled trope that we can't fix climate change because it's going to hurt our economy. Now, I was going to, before I heard Senator King's talk, I was going to talk a bit about the importance of why we need to do this in a bipartisan manner. And it is important, but given people's reaction, I think everyone in this room understands that. And I was also going to talk a bit about the progress that we made on that. We have made progress on that. I'm happy to touch into the questions and answers. But I was thinking that maybe what might be better to talk about instead is the personal toolbox that we all have in this room about making this happen. And that toolbox involves 4 different things. The first thing is changing how we have conversations around this. A lot of what we've seen today has been around for a while, the graphs that Senator King showed us. And I'm sure everyone in this room wouldn't be in this room if we didn't find it persuasive. But the problem is that not everybody in the country does. They've heard of it, but for some reason, 40% of people still don't find it to necessarily be persuasive. So we need to change how we're having conversations so that we're actually starting to try and listen to people. Why don't they necessarily believe this? What do they believe about climate change? What preconceptions do they bring to the table? And ask questions. Try and figure out what their view is before we start advocating for our particular policy or advocating for why climate change is real. What are those barriers that are there? That turns it into a conversation, which people are going to be much more interested in taking part in, but also it allows you to know what the barriers are in terms of what preconceptions they bring into the conversation when you talk about your own policy. The second thing that I want to talk about is the importance of telling stories. Now, I'm not a climate scientist. I'm not an economist. I think I do a pretty decent job of repeating what Tom tells me to say. But at the end of the day, I can't necessarily speak on those issues with authority. Now, it's important that I still do my homework whenever I walk into a meeting with a staffer or with a state legislator. But more important than that, it's important that I find my own voice. Now, for me, what made climate change poignant for me, what made it more than just a story in a newspaper, an academic paper, was Superstorm Sandy in 2012. Now, before that, I always intellectually understood that climate change would result in more frequent extreme weather events. But what happened with Superstorm Sandy is actually that came home to me through personal experience. My wife's family lives in southern New Jersey on an island or a sandbar masquerading as an island called Ocean City. And normally that's fine. It's actually a pretty fantastic place when it's not flooded. But in 2012, unfortunately, the entire island ended up being under about 10 feet of water, which was enough to put my wife's family home and under about 1.5 to 2 feet of flooding. And what really brought climate change home for me was standing in her old bedroom and seeing the stain on the wall. Kind of brownish, blackish stain, went up about 1.5 feet. And that still sticks in my head. And that moment for me is much more poignant than any particular graph or any particular fact that I have about what's going to happen. So when I walk into a conversation, I can talk about that with much more persuasively and with much more authority than I can anything else. So absolutely, do your homework. Make sure that you can participate in the conversation, that you know what the policy is on the table, and that you know where the science is. But remember that when a staffer or a congressman or even just a friend is having a conversation with you, they're interested in you as a person or as a voter or as a constituent, not necessarily as an expert on the issue. Make sure that you're talking to things that they couldn't necessarily get by asking an intern to Google it. The third thing I want to talk about, and this is especially important when it comes to speaking with our congressional representatives, is find a way to express gratitude. CCL really puts a lot of emphasis on that. Look through the person's record. Find something that you like. Hopefully something involving climate change, but if not, something else where you agree on. Or if you don't agree with them on anything, just the mere fact that they ran, or the mere fact that they're representing you. Take it from somebody who ran a state senate campaign about a month ago and failed pretty miserably. It's hard stuff. And serving in government is even harder. So just find a way to thank them for that. You'd be surprised how many people don't, and it really makes a difference in terms of them listening to you, because they then realize that you're actually respecting their role in the process. You're not just there to lecture them about your particular issue. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the fact that every conversation counts. It's not just the conversations with senators and representatives. It's not just showing up to their public hearings and asking questions that make a difference. It's every single question that we have around us. Think about what informs your perspective. Not necessarily the newspapers that you get your facts from, or even necessarily the last movie that you saw that was persuasive. Think about people around you that inform your beliefs. For most people, that's a group of maybe 300 to 400 people. Pretty small. The same is true of most representatives and policymakers. They, of course, have access to a lot more facts. They have access to committee hearings. But when it comes to actually changing their beliefs and changing their perspectives on something, it's going to be based off of those conversations with the people in their close personal circle. And they have that same close personal circle of 300 to 400 people that the rest of us do in this room. So what it comes down to is changing the tide of opinion within those inner circles. And that happens through one-to-one conversations. And that happens through finding a way to engage with those people and listen to their concerns and manage to really convince them why, both teach them why we're interested in this, and then also find a way for them to come to the table. Because at the end of the day, if Republican congressmen and Republican senators are going to come on board with climate change, it isn't just going to be because of the press coverage. It isn't just going to be because of the poll numbers. It's going to be because the conversations that are going on around them and in their personal circles are changing. So yeah, I kind of want to end it there, especially because all of us have an excellent opportunity to put all these skills into practice. We've all got Thanksgiving coming up, right? And I'm guessing that most of us are probably going to tables where we don't necessarily agree with everyone there. Now, I'm not asking you to get into an argument about climate change. I'm not asking you to turn your Thanksgiving dinner into debate club, but if you like what you saw here, if something's really stuck home with you, bring it up. See what other people at the table think. And maybe that conversation only lasts 5 or 10 minutes, but if you hear something there that's interesting, follow up. If you hear somebody whose perspective you don't quite share, mention something that you read an interesting article on, follow up the next day and send them the article in an email. Keep that conversation open, because that's how we're going to end up changing minds. And I'm going to end this by giving a blatant pitch to get involved with CCL. We're a volunteer organization. We only work because volunteers show up. So if I can get everyone who's involved with CCL to raise their hands and keep them up. All right. So you see right here in this room, the people who are involved. If you're interested in what I've spoken about today and getting more involved, please speak with one of us. We also have a table out in the hallway and a volunteer list. And thank you very much for coming.
So we have about 15 minutes in which I ask all the speakers to come down here to answer questions, and I will bring around the microphone so that I can hear your questions. So if all the speakers would come down here. Yes, ma'am.
Check. Two to share.
So I have been asked by the speakers who have listened to everyone to give them each a chance to ask each other a question first, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. I'll ask them to do it quickly. Also, I think all the speakers are going to come to lunch, so after this, we are going to have lunch in the library, which is just about a 2 or 3 minute walk from here, and then you can ask them questions there also. So why don't each of you have one question to ask one other panel member, and then we're going to open it up to the audience.
Andrew, I'm going to ask you a question. Just to say a little bit more, so you belong to Hannaford, which is a pretty big company. It's actually the largest employer in the state of Maine, but it's also part of Del Hayes, which is even a larger company.
Correct.
How do you have conversations within a big corporation about these energy issues and selling them? And does be honest, just you and me and 100 other people and TV cameras.
And a video camera.
Yeah. Does climate change come up? Does carbon emissions and benefits come up? Or is it all about dollars and cents?
So I felt great about that question until the last, the last phrase there. So we get asked that question a lot by many utilities because they see some organizations that get it and some that don't across all the states that we're in. And I think it comes down to a couple of things. One is our organization is set up with a separate energy team. We have a energy team. We have other responsibilities with refrigeration and controls and stuff, but primarily with buying our energy as cheap as we can and using as little of it as possible. So one quick little fun fact is the number one, and I'm sure actually half the people here probably know this, the number one most energy intensive operation in most communities is a hospital. Number two is a grocery store. So I'm glad I'm in number two because I wouldn't know where to start. So part of it is having a separate energy team and running the projects as financial investments. Where you get into the piece of getting it and the environmental impact and fighting climate change and doing the right thing, that's more on our sustainability team's responsibilities. We work closely together. They have different streams of funding and they're able to do things that we can't and we're able to do things that they can't. But we partner on things like the electric vehicle charging stations because of the obvious overlaps. So I think it's easier to get funding when you can show a CFO what the return is, but at the same time they recognize the global impact and the reason for having all the other areas. The other piece where there's a huge amount of overlap is refrigerants that are used we have some stores with natural refrigerants, but that's very new and most stores are using some type of synthetic refrigerants and that's an enormous contribution to ozone depletion and greenhouse gas. So there's a huge impact on doing refrigerant conversions and changing those and doing programs where we can run our stores using natural refrigerants or less ozone depleting refrigerants or with using more glycol systems where it's running through glycol instead of running miles of pipes of refrigerant. So there's lots of overlap and it's getting the buy-in from the right people.
My question's for Dylan. We're going to have the 128th legislature starting up in January here. It's what, in your view, is on the agenda that's particularly relevant to this discussion?
Well, as I described, the RGGI states are deciding on where to go, and that's an active decision right now. There's a stakeholder meeting on Monday, and by the end of the year, the states could decide, well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to reduce emissions by 3% or whatever. That will ultimately need to be adopted in Maine statute. And how quickly that happens and whether it comes up this session or not, we don't know. But it could well be that there's a bill this session that actually needs to kind of ratify that agreement. So that could be quite important and obviously extremely relevant. The other thing I have to say is that we've been working hard on solar power in Maine. Maine's in last place in the region for solar on a per capita basis, and that's because we just have no policy. And actually, the Public Utilities Commission has proposed to take us backwards. So we're going to continue to charge forward with a solar bill. It'll be a little different in some ways from what it was last year, but it'll take a big effort. We expect not to have the governor's support, frankly, and so it's going to take Democrats and Republicans working together, which is an exciting challenge. The Republicans control the state Senate. The Democrats control the House. They're both actually very close, so we have to work together, and we'll see about whether we can do that on solar power.
Any other questions, or should we open up to the audience?
Allow more time from the audience. So
Okay.
respect.
So we will start.
Thank you. I am a small woodlot owner, and so my question is to the RGGI scheme. In California, improved forestation projects are a big piece of their cap and trade program, so that the wood owner, if they agree to increase their carbon stocking over the years, get paid for it. Can that be part of the?
It is technically a part of it, and it's
Much
allowed.
weaker, though. It's non-existent, really.
Well, that's because we're not charging very much for carbon, and so it's not very attractive for woodlot owners to participate in the program. They're just not going to be paid very much. Frankly, lowering the amount of carbon is going to have it's going to increase the price per ton of carbon, and at some point it will become more attractive for woodlot owners and other people to do that. So we need to keep pushing our foot down on how much the reductions are going, and that will increase the value of reducing carbon for you or for others. So I'm going to say it again, these reductions, 3% a year, 4% a year, 5% a year, they are going to accelerate how much carbon, and they're going to put a higher value or higher price on carbon that you could theoretically return.
I think one of the most powerful bipartisan arguments in favor of what you've been talking about today is the idea of renewable energy sector as a jobs generator, and that hasn't been talked about too much. And I was at one panel where they said in Maine, the renewable energy or the solar energy sector is growing faster than any other. I mean, I may have some of the facts wrong, and that more people are working in this field nationally now than in, say, coal mining. So could you talk about that? Because it hasn't been talked about too much. Could you talk about that as, does that have traction in some of the discussions?
Yes. It does. And what's happened is that there is still a bias against solar unless you have some countervailing policy because of the climate change impacts of the other sources. But it has been growing. The economic effect is very large in the state. In fact, you could have told that the best evidence I've seen of that is that when the PUC held its hearings on whether or not to do away with net metering, it was packed. And if you read the actual comments of people are online, and I think there's 400 or 500 of them there now, and I would say 98% are in favor of sort of keeping net metering. So solar energy, and the senator pointed out that the panel prices are dropping rapidly for solar panels. I once had the experience that I was on a radio program, and a guy called in, and he basically said, I'm a retiree, and he said, I want you to know that solar is my retirement plan. And then he said, let me explain that. And he said, because once you buy a solar panel, the cost of that electricity is, of the fuel itself, is zero. And so he said, it'll hold my electricity prices down into the future in a way that I can accommodate in my budget. And then he said, I'm buying a plug-in, and I'm going to use my own power to power my plug-in car. Yeah. And so he was very happy with moving to solar. We have, you think that we're not a very solar state in terms, but that's not true. We actually have a lot of capacity for solar. And in the past, it's actually been pretty bipartisan, too. This last bill, as you probably know, almost passed. I mean, it was something like 2 votes. And so the hope is that it can come back again. So the jobs thing is real, and there are a lot of people, I know installers who have moved to this state specifically to enter the solar business, and they're doing fine. They're a little scared at the moment about what the future holds, depending on what the PUC does.
Just literally 30 seconds. Job creators like predictability, and we have a mixed record of establishing a predictable framework for investments in clean energy nationally and here in the state. And there's some good things we've been doing. On solar right now, we are doing a bad disservice to people who are trying to create jobs because there's very little predictability.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. The gentleman over there, number 1, and the young lady over there.
For the gentleman from Hannaford, I'm sorry, I've missed your name. I appreciate what you've been doing with Efficiency Maine and with your refrigeration and your lighting, but I've always wondered, you have lots of rooftops, a lot of them are flat, and with the price of panels down, I have panels, I power my house completely with panels and heat pumps. Why can't you? Why does it take Efficiency Maine for you? You would seem to me, with all your resources and the price of panels, it's a long-term win situation for you. Can you explain that to me?
So I've worked in my role in store engineering for 3 years, and when I joined, I brought up about doing solar because, like you said, I said, why don't we? And we had some small solar projects that were done in the past, but nothing to the size of an entire roof. I brought that up, and I was immediately told you'll never get it to be financially viable. So I took that challenge, and in 2014 and 2015, we did 4 stores with full solar panels from roof edge to roof edge, minus the rooftop equipment. But they range from about 100 kilowatt DC up to 300 kilowatt DC and covered the entire store. Now it's exciting, especially when you can take a Google satellite and see your solar panels there, and it's exciting when you see all the benefits of solar in a business that has its peak refrigeration load, its peak air conditioning load, all when the peak load is set for charging your demand charges and everything. So there's great financial return. Unfortunately, and I don't mean this as, I live in Maine and I love Maine, it wasn't in Maine. There's other programs in other states that were better. And we have stores in 5 states. So I'd love to do more, and we'll do more. But as exciting as solar is, I can get so much more bang for my buck by doing efficiency than by generating. Because I cover the entire roof of a building, a 56,000 square foot building with a 300 kilowatt DC solar system. And when that thing is at peak, it's still only doing about 25% of my store load. I can upgrade the sales floor lights in the entire store, put doors on the cases, handful of other things that I can do in the entire store, and I can drop that load by more than 25%, 12 months a year, not just when it's generating peak in the summer. So ideally, I'd have an unlimited budget and I'd do it all. And I'd love to be there, but we're not that yet. One quick example on efficiency, a store that was one of our worst performers, and we decided to try to cut the energy in half. And we went in there and we're almost hitting our goal. We're down to half the electricity. And by this winter now, when we can continue metering it, we'll have half the propane use. So we cut it in half from 2014 over what our new year will be 2017, just by doing efficiency measures. So.
Hello, my name's Ari, and I'm also from Maine. And my question's for you as well, but it can be opened up to the rest of the panelists. And I saw that you worked a lot on how to make things more efficient, but I couldn't help but notice how you had these really efficient lights and stuff hanging above a bunch of bananas, which probably have a pretty high carbon footprint. And I'm sure all the other things in your store have some relative carbon footprint. So I'm wondering if any of the measures you've done have been compared to the carbon used to actually get the products into your store, and if opening up to the rest of the panelists, if any of the measures that you guys have taken have actually considered on how to not kind of put a Band-Aid over a problem that we have with using too much carbon, but actually changing the game and how people structure how we live.
I'm tempted to pass it off because I don't have a great answer, but the immediate thought is my responsibilities are with the retail stores, and we do have people doing efficiency projects with transportation and distribution, and actually have done some very large projects with making the 18-wheelers that deliver the product more efficient. We're sourcing, focusing on more local sourcing. Obviously, you can't buy bananas locally, but I'll pass it off to get a higher quality answer on that.
You shouldn't have said that right before you handed it to me. Look, I think that if you think back to this morning's presentation by Senator King, and you think about the direction that climate policy may be going in the United States for the foreseeable future, you could get discouraged and think that there's not something you can be doing to solve that sitting in the back row of this auditorium. And you'd be right. You're not going to solve that whole problem. You got to do what you can do. He's in charge of facilities at a grocery store. That's what he's in charge of. He's doing what he can do. I'm in charge of efficiency programs for the state of Maine to help people reduce their energy costs. That's what I can do. You figure out what you can. If it's not buying bananas, don't buy bananas. If it's buying a Nissan Leaf used off of a lease, do that. Find what you can do. Don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. And I'm not saying that's what you're proposing. I'm just saying be careful of that, because if you want to try and really take a bite out of this problem in a timely fashion, you could waste another decade trying to achieve the perfect, and you won't be able to do some of the good. So just be careful what you're going for. Do what you can do.
So it's painful to cut off this discussion because that was fantastic. However, that is a wonderful lead-in to our final speaker, Grayson Chepiniak, because she is a student here at the University of New England. She's a marine sciences major and a climate change minor. And we were very excited to get her to come talk because she is someone who is hopefully going to tell us a little bit about what we can do personally. So she is going to give the final talk, and then we're going to break for lunch. We're going to go over to the Ketchum Library. And if we did not get to your question, please grab one of the panelists and ask them over lunch. But I'd like to now introduce you to Grayson Chepiniak.
This is kind of important. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet because I am the one thing standing between you guys and lunch. And as a college student, I know not to get between people and food. So before I begin, I would just like to thank Senator King for taking the time out of his busy schedule to come and speak with us today. I would also like to thank the Citizens Climate Lobby, the Natural Resources Council of Maine, and the University of New England for co-hosting this event. Lastly, I would like to thank Dr. Bethany Woodworth, who is a member of the Department of Environmental Studies and who is the one who is mainly responsible for putting together today's wonderful event. So thank you all. When I started as a first year at UNE, I did not know much at all about climate change. There were never any opportunities to discuss it in my high school science classes, and it wasn't even a big topic in my freshman environmental class here. Sure, we touched on it, but we really didn't go in depth. The curriculum here at UNE mandates that each student must take at least 2 social global awareness courses in order to graduate. So my sophomore year, I decided to take climate change, causes, consequences, and solutions, which gave me my first real taste of climate change. That course was truly life-changing for me. It opened my eyes to the world around me, all the damage we are causing as a society, and on a much smaller scale, my own personal carelessness. The world needed to change, and I wanted to do my part to help. So imagine my excitement when I learned that the university was starting a new interdisciplinary climate change studies minor. I knew immediately that it would become a part of my focus of study on top of my major and already current minor. Now, 2 years later, I stand here as a senior. I have learned more about climate change than I ever could have imagined through courses on law and policy, and physics, and economics, and more. I'm imagining countless futures in conservation and law and education. The climate change study minor offers students numerous opportunities and has helped me and my classmates find a passion in learning. And that is something that should be celebrated. This event is, in part, a kickoff celebration in honor of UNE's newest minor, and I am honored to be a part of it. Your participation here today means so much to us as a student body and university as a whole. We are not politicians in charge of changing the laws, and we are not a nonprofit calling you to action. We are a school preparing students for futures in the sciences, businesses, liberal arts, and health professions. We are a community pushing for better environment so that our children and grandchildren and everyone else who comes after us will be able to enjoy nature the way that we have. Change begins here with us. The afternoon session of today's conference will focus on the role of higher education in fostering innovative and effective climate change solutions. Alethea Carity, UNE's Sustainability Coordinator, will talk about opportunities for us to model smart climate practices. Bethany Woodworth, coordinator of the Climate Change Minor, will discuss how to teach climate change across disciplines. Barry Costa-Pierce, the director of the Marine Science Center, will look to the future of climate change research at UNE. And Jessica Satella, Kate Santapiero, and Sarah Fleshman, UNE students and alumni, will talk about engaging students in democratic action. The afternoon will feature discussions in which we, as a school and a community, can strategize for moving forward, as well as a lobby workshop hosted by the Citizens Climate Lobby. I invite you all to join us after lunch to take part in these important discussions and to find out how you can do more as an individual. I would also like to invite you all to, on your way out to lunch, check out the art show featuring works by CCL's Lori Sproul and UNE's artist-in-residence Kim Bernard. Please also check out the research posters by students and faculty, and please stop by the tables for the different organizations. Ask questions, and we'll have answers. We'd love to talk about this stuff, so we will address any questions that you have. Lastly, there is a green car expo during the lunch hour. It's over on the other side of the library. There are signs to guide you there, and that'll be happening from 12:30 to 1:30. There's a variety of electric and hybrid cars, and it's put on by the student organization Earth's Eco. So that's all I have for you. Thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you this afternoon.
Welcome back, everyone, to the second half of the Climate Change Solutions Forum at the University of New England. My name is Nicole Gallagher. I'm an undergraduate student here in the Environmental Studies program. I am also a solar ambassador for Revolve, which is a nonprofit organization that helps university students crowdfund to get solar panels on other nonprofit organizations in the community. I want to direct you to that because it's just one of the ways that the University of New England helps support action, direct action in the community for the students. There's more information over there on the table about Revolve. UNE has committed to informing every student who walks through the door about the importance of environmental awareness. No matter if you plan to pursue a career as a teacher, a doctor, an entrepreneur, everyone will go on to their careers and personal lives understanding that we all need to be more mindful of the earth. Universities play a major role in facilitating the minds of students to generate ideas to some of the world's biggest problems. We are here today to discuss solutions to one of the most pressing issues of our time, which is climate change. You will hear about the ways UNE has committed to climate change mitigation, the opportunities that students have for learning about how climate change affects all of us, the research that's being done and can be done right here at UNE, as well as the ways that you can take direct action and become an environmental steward through student-led organizations. In fact, you are all choosing to be environmental students by showing up today, environmental stewards. And we will welcome your insight later as we break into groups to discuss some of the important issues that have been shared with you today. Now I would like to introduce Alethea Carity, who has been our sustainability coordinator at UNE for the past 8.5 years. With an undergraduate degree in biology and environmental science and a master's in education, and as an owner of a small dairy and fiber farm, she enjoys combining her education, experience, and passion. She has worked on several energy efficiency projects with facilities management and campus planning during her tenure. Manages the recycling program here at UNE, which is pretty extensive, and assists with implementation of sustainability initiatives routed through the Environmental Council and students.
Her favorite part of the job is working with different groups on campus, especially the students. And I would like to personally welcome my mentor, Alethea Creed.
Thanks, Nicole. Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us and being here. UNE became a signatory to the American College and University President's Climate Commitment in 2008. As Dr. Ripich mentioned this morning, it was recently renamed the Carbon Commitment for obvious reasons. Shorten it a bit. This commitment was a pledge of climate neutrality. And as part of the pledge, UNE agreed to conduct a carbon footprint analysis, set a carbon zero date with interim targets, and draft a climate action plan, which was to be our roadmap on this carbon neutrality journey. While I set the stage for the body of this talk, I'll display the introductory paragraph to the climate leadership statement that's associated with the carbon commitment, because it so eloquently outlines why our university is uniquely positioned to do this work. Earlier this week, I had the good fortune of communicating with one of our former UNE students, who's here with us today, and telling her about this forum. She emailed me some very encouraging words that I wanted to share with you and that underscore some of the points from this climate leadership statement. She pointed out that universities are a place that teenagers enter and young adults emerge. And along their 4-year journey, their core values are either solidified or revolutionized. Students test themselves by taking a variety of classes, trying new experiences, and engaging in discussions and debates that stretch them. She embraced the notion that if universities are places of innovation for students' lives, so shouldn't they also be places of innovation and agents of change for our nation? Shouldn't they be a testing ground for shaping sustainable societies? I'm proud of the fact that environmental stewardship is a core value at the University of New England, and I would argue that environmental stewardship is integrally woven throughout all of the other core values that are displayed on the screen for the university. Just as we provide laboratories and faculty and co-curricular activities that empower and challenge and nurture our students to exemplify these core values, we must also provide building facilities, policies, and practices that show evidence of the core values of our institution. And that is what I mean by modeling climate-smart practices. In the 8 years that I've been at UNE as a sustainability coordinator, the university has undertaken many sustainability initiatives that address climate change, and Dr. Ripich mentioned some of them this morning in her introduction. Each project is weighed in both the proposal stage and in the reflection stage according to several different metrics. Some projects are more impactful than others in terms of reducing emissions, such as our building automation control project. Some projects are iconic and symbolize innovation and forward thinking, such as our solar thermal system on the campus center and our electric vehicle charging stations, one of which is solar powered. Some projects carry collateral benefits, like marketing on the wrapped intercampus connector that shuttles students, faculty, and staff between our 2 main campuses. And some projects just make good sense from energy and maintenance perspectives, like LED lighting retrofits. Some projects enhance reputation and build out a portfolio of experience, like our 2 LEED certified buildings, Secaucus Hall and the College of Pharmacy. I'd like to provide a little bit more context about why this forum is at a particularly poignant time for me and for the university. As I mentioned, UNE drafted a climate action plan in 2010, and that was required by the carbon commitment. And we're currently undertaking an update to that plan. Last month, we held a World Cafe event at which 40 UNE community members representing alumni, faculty, staff, students, and administrators from both campuses engaged in a 2.5-hour brainstorming session to gather ideas to be included in our next climate action plan. The most pervasive thread of conversation woven throughout the evening, the one question that I heard at every roundtable discussion was, How do we make sustainability a part of UNE's culture? How do we incorporate sustainability as the way we do business? This is a very important question. My answer goes a step further to ask, how do we walk the walk so that others will follow? I frequently find myself in conversations with people who view young people's environmental demands in hypocritical opposition with their behaviors. Let's save the planet, but can I borrow the keys to the SUV? It is absolutely essential that modeling climate-smart practices includes individual behaviors, which are at the heart of that culture question. But individual behaviors will not reduce the majority of our emissions. I believe that our institutions of higher education must model efficiency and conservation with our students with smart, clean, and green infrastructure, at the same time that we ask them to do their part by turning out the lights or recycling appropriately. We must provide the infrastructure that shows that we, as the institution, respect the environment at the same time that we ask our students to model sustainable behaviors. As I said, we're in the development phase of updating our climate action plan. This document will guide us through the next 5 years of mitigation strategies. The results of the World Cafe brainstorming session yielded really rich, thoughtful ideas. We're seeking more input from the university community. We distributed a survey on Monday that exhibited all of the ideas that were gathered, and we're asking students, faculty, and staff and administrators to priority rank them. As with the projects that we've already undertaken, some cost more than others, some are more impactful than others, some are more iconic and eye-catching than others, and some carry more collateral and intangible benefits than others. Already we've had over 480 responses from our community, which is a fantastic response rate. It's a great vocalization of the need for many of these measures. In preparation for this talk, I was asked to envision climate-smart practices that I thought UNE should undertake and that I'm advocating for inclusion in our climate action plan. Most of these were uncovered at the World Cafe event. To be carbon neutral by 2040 means embracing all of the available technologies to reduce our emissions and fortifying the social norms of conservation habits. It means everyone doing their part to conserve energy and simultaneously investing in infrastructure that delivers our energy in the most efficient and clean way possible. It means being innovative and conservative at the same time. So here are some hugely impactful mitigation strategies that are also realistic and well within our reach that should be part of UNE's climate action plan. First one is large-scale solar. Harnessing the power of the sun and turning it into electricity or heat is a proven technology whose price has decreased precipitously in the last several years. We heard about that this morning. There are several companies offering payment structures called power purchase agreements that can install large-scale systems with no capital expenditure and contracts for 20 years of green power at costs that are comparable to today's electricity rates. This requires space and an appetite for a creative financial model. And solar thermal is even more efficient than solar PV, although a little bit less versatile. We need both, and lots of them. Biomass fuel. The boilers in our central heating plant are nearing the end of their useful life. We should explore renewable fuel stocks and take advantage of a deferred maintenance opportunity to reduce overall costs. Pellets or wood chips are made from low-grade forest waste and debris. In heavily forested Maine, biomass is locally sourced and renewable and supportive of our local economy. Similar projects in Maine have found that they pay for themselves in 6 to 10 years and reduce emissions by as much as 80%. Cogeneration. Cogeneration systems simultaneously generate thermal and electrical energy from a single fuel source, allowing for between 80 to 85% efficient use of fuels, compared to 45% efficiency if you talk about separate electrical power and on-site heat generation. There are small building-sized cogeneration systems, and there are large district-sized systems. Both are attainable, proven technologies with reasonable payback periods. We heard a lot about energy efficiency this morning. I believe that every new building should meet the strictest energy criteria for efficiency of building systems, building envelopes, and energy-consuming systems and appliances. Old buildings should be retrofitted to include the most energy-efficient controls possible. When evaluating capital projects, it's key that life cycle cost analysis should be integrated into the design process right from the start. Energy manager, someone who is singularly responsible for benchmarking and monitoring energy consumption and performance of all of our buildings, who can set reduction goals, identify priorities, and who can scout for new technologies and best practices that will propel us further toward carbon reductions. A 1999 study by ASHRAE found that energy managers create energy and operational savings that substantially exceed the cost of their own employment. They pay for themselves. A green revolving fund. Dr. Ripich explained this a little bit this morning, but financing energy efficiency has two sides. On the one hand, all efficiency projects eventually pay for themselves over time. But on the other side, most carry a large capital expense up front. It can be difficult to cross that accounting barrier of operational savings and capital expenditures, but green revolving funds can do this. UNE established a green revolving fund a little over a year ago, which was seeded with $25,000 by Dr. Ripich. She also signed on to the $1 Billion Green Challenge with a pledge to grow our green revolving fund to $326,000. We've recently increased the fund to about $40,000 currently through donations and small savings from 2 initial LED retrofits. We need to continue to grow this fund so that we can take strategic advantage of energy efficiency opportunities that may not align with capital improvement projects or other funding cycles. And finally, institutionalization. Just like safety has become part of our culture and we mandate safety trainings for our students and employees, we have an opportunity to infuse a culture of sustainability and environmental awareness. By including sustainability in every job description at the university, our employees will see what part they play in the overall stewardship of both our financial and our environmental resources. Using programs like the UNE Green Office program will help departments come together as communities and develop those social norms of waste reduction and energy conservation. Institutionalizing climate smart practices means putting policies in place that support awareness and adoption. Stewardship is responsible and ethical management of our resources. When we think of environment in terms of stewardship, it is often of more tangible aspects like water and land and wildlife and habitat and air. Climate can be somewhat of a harder concept to grasp in terms of stewardship because it's a collection of meteorological values that include temperature and humidity and wind and precipitation. Scientists agree that there is no greater pressing issue than that of climate change. UNE has been a leader by signing the carbon commitment and conducting our early projects to mitigate our emissions. We need to be tenacious in our efforts to reduce emissions further. We should not be debating the chicken and egg sequence. We must continue to build and redesign our infrastructure so that acting in an unsustainable way would be completely incongruent with campus culture. And we must be so fastidious in our conservation behaviors that building or maintaining inefficient and fossil-fueled infrastructure is no longer tolerable. One does not come before the other. Infrastructure and behavior must go hand in hand, and that's what I mean by modeling climate smart practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Alethea, for sharing with the community how we can be helping to mitigate climate change here at the university level. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Bethany Woodworth. She is a professor in the Department of Environmental Studies here at the University of New England. She came to UNE 10 years ago from Hawaii, where she studied the role of climate change on endangered Hawaiian forest birds. She helped establish UNE's interdisciplinary minor in climate change studies and is committed to the goal of fostering environmental awareness in all students regardless of major or profession. And without her, this event would not have happened today. So please welcome Bethany to the mic.
Before I begin, I just want to say a shout out and a thank you to everybody who's helped make today run so smoothly. Could I ask all of the volunteers in the room to stand up, please, and be acknowledged? Oh, come on. Thank you. Today couldn't have been possible without the collaboration of literally dozens of people, including the co-hosts, many people in the administration, my colleagues at the University of New England, and all those students. I'm going to begin with a quote. This is a Chinese proverb that when I thought about what I wanted to talk about today, came to mind. It begins by, goes, "The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago." You guys know this quote? The second best time is now. Clearly, this is appropriate for a conversation about climate change because the job would have been much easier if we had started 20 or 40 years ago. It also seemed appropriate to me, and I should say, even though it would have been easier then, there is certainly no reason that we should throw up our hands in despair and quit now. The second best time to start is right now and not to put it off any longer. The second reason this quote came to my mind was because the focus of my talk is the role of higher education in solving climate change problems, and especially focusing on the education of young people. And teaching students, of any age really, feels a lot like planting a tree. Wouldn't you agree, those of you that are teachers? You just put a little bit into it, and it grows beyond your wildest imaginations, and it gives you back so much more than you ever put into it, and it will live on after us. Students will see things in the future that your teachers will not see, and we're looking forward to the wonderful things that you guys accomplish. I'm going to make the argument today that while the university has many different roles in helping to solve climate change, that we need to be educating our students not just in environmental studies or in climate change. We need to be educating them about these issues across the disciplines. That there is that universities have a foundational responsibility to educate students not only to be professionals, skilled professionals, and wonderful human beings, but they need to be able to understand all aspects of societal challenges from a multitude of disciplines in the context of a liberal education. What I'd like to do today is to talk to you about, first I'd like to explain 3 reasons why I believe that this is such a vitally important role, and then to talk about some strategies for educating students across the curriculum. Why is climate change education especially important at the university level? I'd like to make 3 statements, and the first one is that today's college students will reach midlife as we pass the 2 degrees Celsius threshold. You all familiar with the 2-degree threshold? That is the level of warming which scientists tell us we should not exceed if we are to avoid dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system, whatever that means, right? And as we pass that 2-degree threshold, all right, when you students are in the middle of your lives, this is going to have profound effects on your personal lives, your communities, and your professions. Now, bear with me. This is the only graph I have, I promise. But I use it in my classes to make a very important point. Those of you who've had me for class probably recognize this. What this shows you is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's 2007 projections for what could happen in the future under various climate change scenarios. The black line, is this a pointer? Oh, how nice. The black line here is actual data. This is what is actually warmed from the year 1900 to 2000. And from 2000 to 2100, you can see a variety of different scenarios. These are stories that we say, okay, this is the, for example, the gold line here is called the constant carbon commitment if we keep our emissions steady. And to bracket it for you, this is business as usual if we take no action whatsoever to curb our carbon emissions. We don't do anything about population or renewable energy. We just let things go. So as you can see, the various scenarios of environment and economic balance come out in some fairly different stories. So here's the 2 degrees over pre-industrial. And down here is where I have drawn for the students their lives. Okay, they were born in about 1990, this current crop, what about 1999, 1998, is that right? They'll graduate from college in 2020. Their children will graduate from college right around the middle of the century. They'll retire at 2065. You can see where the temperature's going in their lives. Right? They'll be 80 years old, and their children will be 80 years old. I think it's kind of funny to say, in my original version of this slide, it used to say, you die, and your kids die. They didn't like that. So I've tempered it down a little bit. The point is that we're talking about changes that are in their lifetimes and their children's lifetimes. I mean, I'm going to see a lot of this, but we're not talking anymore. All my life we've been saying, oh, we have to save the environment for our children and our grandchildren. Well, the children are here, and they're our students, and they're growing up in a different world. And this is when they're going to be bouncing grandchildren on their knee when we're into dangerous anthropogenic climate change if we don't do something. So that's the first reason I show this slide, is to emphasize the fact that this is their lives. The second is to say that, well, I should go back to this. Look at how much power we have. We have a huge degree of power in what happens over this time, depending on what decisions we make. And that's really the hopeful part of this slide, right? That what happens depends on the decisions we make now, and specifically on the decisions not only that we, but our students also make. But nonetheless, it's pretty clear that our students are going to come of age in perilous times. They're going to live in a world that's very different than what we do. We're always talking about educating the students for the future they're going to inhabit instead of the past, where we come from. That's a constant challenge. But we're not just talking about teaching them to use iPads or supercomputers or be entrepreneurs or to learn to have 5 jobs in one lifetime. We're talking about this as well. Second argument for really focusing on this at the university level is that today's college students are going to need to be conscious of the impact of their lives and livelihoods on the climate. Today at the University of New England, we are educating people who are going to become the architects who design the green buildings, the investment bankers who have to decide on the ethics of various investments. We are educating the hospital workers. This is a hospital in Dubai with solar panels on the roof. They're going to be running the water management company out in California. Are those water management people going to understand that the drought probably isn't going to go away? It's probably not going to go back to normal. That's our job, to teach them that. And finally, I think it's especially important at the university level because in order to make progress, we need to have an informed and a conscientious electorate. I don't think that anybody would argue with me on that one at this particular point in time. And this is really twofold. It's not just because we need you guys in the audience, you students in the audience, to be active, to be inspired and knowledgeable enough to be active and caring members of society. But I'll tell you what, when the going gets tough and you're feeling really down, sometimes action is the best medicine. And so if we teach them this, we give them the tools to act. And many times that's the best thing that keeps you from feeling too down about things when you see things are wrong. Now for the next part, I'm going to skip a couple of slides because I want to be conscious of time. But I do want to say that there's a broad amount of research out there about the role of universities in solving climate change, and that there are many different interpretations of what kinds of things we need to focus on. But Just to draw your attention to, for example, the analysis of lemons, what students need to be able to do. These are the kinds of things that we want students to be able to do anyway. Investigate and diagnose problems that are inherently complex and interdisciplinary. Work effectively with people from diverse institutions. Communicate effectively with specialists from other disciplines. So we don't need to be completely abandoning the things that we want to do anyway. It fits very well into our goals for education as a whole. Now I'm going to mention 5 different ways that I believe that universities can make a difference, and many of them are highlighted in their own talks this afternoon. But I'll begin with education. Clearly, education is one of the major goals of any institution of higher education. And I'd like to put this call for more climate change education in context. The first environmental studies program was established way back in 1965 when I was 4 years old at Middlebury College, just down the road. And today, 77% of all U.S. institutions now offer an undergraduate degree program in sustainability. It's about 1,183 programs at over 600 universities. In context, the first climate change studies minor was established at the University of Montana just in 2009. And when the University of New England added its climate change minor, as I'm sure you heard from Danielle this morning, this fall, just rolling it out, we are about the 10th or 12th program in the country that I know of. What I want to clarify, though, is I had a friend and colleague say to me, so this is just a stepping stone to a major, right? And in fact, I'm not the least bit interested in having a major in climate change. I think he thought I was crazy. And the reason is because what we need to do is to have people who are educated and interested in doing all kinds of jobs being aware of climate change. So rather than trying to have climate change, more and more people specializing in climate change or environmental studies, what I want to see is students in business understanding climate change and being able to develop a business plan with the news future in mind. I want to see people being able to take a health professions degree and understand what the impacts of climate change are on human health, okay? Or economics, graduating and understanding really the ins and outs of cap and trade and how it's been used successfully before. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so I'm not arguing that we need to have a bunch of climate change majors. Rather, I would love to see interdisciplinary minors that drew on people and students and departments in all kinds of stripes and colors. So here are my strategies for education. First of all, I really believe that it's strong that every student should be formally introduced to the subject of climate change and has an opportunity to get their questions and confusions answered. These students are really confused often when they first come into the classroom. They've heard all kinds of things. They don't know what to think. They don't know how the science works. They don't know, and they really have questions. They want to talk about it. So as a university, I think we should give them a place to do that. And that's every student. Many of these students, I'd say, at least half and probably 3/4 of my students have come in without ever having that conversation in high school, believe it or not. So they're not getting it in high school. Can we just get that? Unless they've taken an environmental science AP class or something. How many students here got a good education in climate change in high school? Want to raise your hands? Got 3 here. How many felt like it wasn't treated well enough in high school or you didn't get anything at all? Okay, so you see what I mean, right? I do that survey all the time in my classrooms, so I'm not surprised. I also want to argue for the creation of core courses with a thematic focus on climate change in every discipline that we can. For example, here at the University of New England, the Marine Science Department has a class in climate change and the sea. We have a physics class, climate and energy and climate. We have sociology and culture, climate change and sociology, to establish as many of those courses in different departments. That sends a powerful message to students that this is not a specialized area of study, right? And it allows us to do a better job of educating them in all those areas. I would argue for, at other universities, the creation of formal minors that are truly multidisciplinary so that they'll attract students in many majors outside traditional environmental fields. So University of New England has done this, and I would like to see it spread to other institutions. Establishing a mechanism to connect faculty to teaching resources, partnerships, and each other, that would be really valuable. Many times a person in one department might not really see how they're, see the many opportunities for them to incorporate climate change into their curriculum. And that would be a great improvement. And finally, this is happening at the University of New England, but I know many other universities where it's not the case, and we can always do better, to create an academic culture where climate change discourse is encouraged among faculty and seen as a legitimate focus of academic pursuits, not just a fringe issue. So I believe that, for example, by holding today's conference, it takes us a step closer to that goal. The other things that I would normally talk about, we have excellent speakers such as Barry Koster-Pierce will talk to us about universities making a difference in climate change research. Alethea's talk on modeling climate smart practices was really stellar. I believe that partnerships and community outreach are really important, and I believe that this falls into that category. And we'll also have speakers talking about engaged citizens today. Closing thoughts. Educate for the future, not for the past. All students, not just majors, across the disciplines. Using universities as experimental laboratories and models of sustainability. Get the students in there helping to design these projects that Alethea described so well. Moving beyond small and easy to systemic change. Again, I think I'm echoing, I'm channeling Alethea Critty here for a minute. And partnering with outside organizations to fulfill our role as a resource and a community educator. And I want to thank formally the Citizens Climate Lobby and the Natural Resources Council of Maine for their role in today in partnering with us. So I'd like to close my talk then, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Bethany. Up next, we're going to hear from Barry Koster-Pierce talk about the future of climate change research at UNE. Barry A. Koster-Pierce is the Henry L. and Grace Doherty Professor, Chair of the Department of Marine Sciences, and Director of the Center for Excellence in the Marine Sciences at the University of New England. He has a PhD in oceanography from the University of Hawaii and a Master of Science in Zoology and Limnology from the University of Vermont. His research interests are in ocean food ecosystems, how seafood systems throughout the world interact with marine freshwater ecosystems, fisheries, aquacultures, and peoples. Dr. Koster-Pierce has spent his career developing local to global scientific and educational programs and applied scientific partnerships that talk truth to power and assist coastal communities to make a difference. He has lived and worked in the USA from Hawaii to Maine and internationally from Indonesia to Africa. Before coming to UNE, Professor Koster-Pierce spent 11 years as a professor of fisheries and aquaculture and director of Rhode Island Sea Grant at the University of Rhode Island. In 2011, Professor Koster-Pierce was elected as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Can we please welcome him to the mic?
Thank you for that beautiful introduction, and my great thanks to Bethany Woodworth, and especially the students in environmental sciences for putting this on, and the donors, so thanks a lot. Today, what I want to do is I want to feature just one project, I think, at UNE that really captures the transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary nature of this field. I want to spend a lot of time convincing you to be surprised. Don't expect to be surprised by climate change. I've been working the last 3 years. As you see, I'm very, very interested in multi-institutional, multinational projects, particularly that involve wicked problems like climate change. And so just recently, I've gotten involved with the New England Ocean Cluster and the North Atlantic Marine Initiative and spent 3 trips to Iceland with many of my colleagues in Maine, and was very surprised because, and hopeful, maybe a little bit optimistic about the future. Okay, I want to feature this project because this is the way UNE does business, and I feature the Department of Biology, but you really think about this project, and it screams holism at you. Okay, it's dealing with not only climate change, but it also is addressing the issues and the problems of the people of the place, and it may say biology, but there was the Department of Environmental Sciences involved in this, the Marine Science Department, the University of Maine's Sustainability Solutions Initiative was part of this. So it is a really good example of the way we do business. And I wanted to feature this because, again, not reading it, what it does is it features hope. Their science is pointing out that, there might be areas of these riparian coastal zones like us, like this beautiful place, where we can look at plant and microbial assemblages that might be able to survive and can keep these natural ecosystems more intact. One of my big words for you today is resilience. Resilience and adaptation to climate change. Bethany couldn't have done a better job with this. So the 5 great issues of our day of sustainability science: food, energy, water, waste, and shelter. So as I've been traveling throughout the United States and the world, there are new institutes. We're breaking apart the academy from these traditional stovepipe departments. And we're seeing academies of food. We're seeing academies of water, or institutes and centers evolving. And that's because of these 2 great drivers: population growth and overlaying on top of that climate change. And you can see that I've used a couple of new words maybe to you. Transdisciplinary, people who are comfortable in not just one discipline. So the National Science Foundation's one of its top priorities, and has spent millions of dollars, is in social ecological systems, SES. That's one of their top priorities. In the ocean, you can't study things going on in the ocean without taking the human dimensions of coastal systems into account. Because we've entered, a lot of scientists feel, this new era on the planet called the Anthropocene, where people are determining all of the major biogeochemical and evolutionary cycles on this planet. Not just, we say in the marine world, people are not plankton. Yeah, we understand he's plankton, but you can't understand plankton without people. So the other thing I wanted to mention there is transplace. When I was a young man of the age of the undergraduates in this audience, I basically had a ditty, think globally, act locally. Ain't enough anymore, everybody. We've got to send out our best and brightest all over the world to act locally, globally. Because the issues here, right in this little ecosystem, our beautiful Maine, they're iterations of that locally all over the world. So when I talk about sea level rise and preparations for that, every single jurisdiction I'm going to is dealing with that same issue locally. Saco River Corridor Commissions, and there's commissions all over the world that are dealing with that. So send our best and brightest all over this world to just dive right into a local plan. And then the other part is this sustainability science rubric. I had the absolute pleasure of working with 30 scientists throughout the world for that 22 volumes of that sustainability science encyclopedia. And what it is basically a point in time for every single one of those 5 great issues of the day. And that encyclopedia is going to be revised every 3 years. It's on the web. And basically you can dial up almost in a Wikipedia format any sustainability science issue of those 5 great. So what's the big driver? This one shocked scientists like me to the core, because I grew up 10 years ago thinking that global population was going to stabilize. And Gerland's paper in Science says, not going to stabilize, it's going to continue to increase. So young people in the audience are dealing with a very crowded planet. And that includes the ocean planet. Don't think when you stand out at our beach and look out there that it's not crowded. When you put on all of the uses on the ocean out there, it's an incredibly crowded place. And we can't even find some dots on the map right now for local food production because everybody is sort of saying, no, there's too many other uses out there. So we've got to learn how to do marine spatial planning in that sort of era. I wanted to put this one up because it's 13 and growing. Senator King pointed out all the eyeballs. So scientists, we call those empirical data points. We're seeing things melting. But all the modelers are saying the same thing. Okay, so there's a massive global consensus of not only the modelers, but also the people putting eyeballs on things, like the empirical scientists observing. Okay, and where is it all going? It's all going to the ocean. And so what is this causing? Well, it's not only causing an increase, in sea level rise, it's causing sea level rise from expansion, the thermal expansion of the ocean. So we're dealing with two big factors that we really, at this point, we're observing to a level that you heard about this morning. But it's not equally distributed. This is, if you take a look at this, is a very recent, I think it was at 2016. Yeah. What you're seeing is that who's warming fastest is the poles. And our bioregion, the North Atlantic up to the Arctic, is the fastest warming region on the planet. And it's been recently said by our friends at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute that the Gulf of Maine is the most rapidly warming body of water in the world. And so what is happening, and this is now the opportunities, not just the challenges, because there are actually going to be climate winners and losers for the foreseeable future. So economists and our friends in the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, African Development Bank, they're paying attention to this. And as scientists, this is species movements per half degree of latitude over various time periods. And you can see where species are moving is towards the poles. Now, in our area, this is also what's happening. We're seeing like tremendous wanderings of these two great heat engines. Well, the one great heat engine, the Gulf Stream, and the cold coming down, the Labrador Current coming from the north. And you can see I put the arrows on, because this is what, as scientists, many of us are modeling these kinds of activities. The Gulf Stream has started to come in to the Gulf of Maine much more frequently. And the Labrador Current is, because it carries a huge amount of meltwater now, is wandering more towards the central part of the North Atlantic. In a graph for you, if I can put this, the blue shows the position of the Gulf Stream in the Gulf of Maine. And as you can see, if I carried it out, it's even more dramatic. So we're getting more and more Gulf Stream water into the Gulf of Maine than ever before, and less of the Labrador Current water. The coldest place in the North Atlantic last year was not far in the north. It was just where that arrow, the tip of that arrow points, north of the Azores, which has caused serious movement of species all around this region. So things are moving. So we're getting things moving up from the south. We're getting tarpon in southern New England. We're seeing blue crabs in Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. We're seeing striped bass, the center of striped bass production, moving north very, very fast to where it's now mid-coast Maine. It's no longer Massachusetts. So we're all watching this, and we are constantly surprised by what we're seeing off of our shores. In southern Rhode Island, tropical species that were caught on warm core rings that spun off the major Gulf Stream every year, brought tropical species and dumped them in southern Rhode Island every year. And our friends in New England Aquarium used to go there to capture their tropical fish for their aquariums. This last year and last couple of years, we're seeing tropical species establish in southern New England, not just come as visitors to die off in the winter. Okay, so this is, as Senator King pointed out, we've lost a lot of ice up there. But this is now becoming a much more complex, as a biological oceanographer, it's a lot more complex. The ice is thinner than ever before. More light is getting underneath there, and there's plenty of nutrients up there. So we're seeing this movement, which we're calling the Atlantification of the Arctic, or the southern invasion. And this is causing not only changes, dramatic changes here, it's causing dramatic changes up further north of us that are causing tremendous economic implications to us here in Maine. And they're quite surprising. So this is what the ice looks like now in many parts of the year. But our biologist friends pointed this out, that because there was plenty of nutrients and now plenty of light, that they were measuring at the base of the food web phenomenal production. So much production that it was higher than the largest upwelling zones in the world, off of Peru and off of Africa. So much production that where are our cod now and our haddock? Way up north there. And so just to give you an idea of how dramatic this is, the changes that have gone on in the Barents Sea have affected dramatically the economies of at least 4 nations, to the point now where the second largest export from Norway is oil and fish. And Russia is all over this. And they're trying to manage these new stocks. So there's our cod. That number is shaken fisheries scientists to the core, because up to this point, it was all about cod and haddock all dead and dying, fisheries are all in deep trouble. You heard all of those, dire stories. They're in the newspaper almost every month. This is 1.1 million metric tons. That is the entire aquaculture production of the continent of Africa, which has only come out in the last 2 to 3 years. And so what's happening? We are actually seeing Norwegian fishery reports, press reports, that are only like what you would hear in the 1650s here in New England, that boats coming into shore deep in the water with their gunnels deep in the water full of fish, and the economy booming in eastern Iceland all up to this area, because that's where they are, and this is where all the nutrients are. So as the Arctic warms and becomes ice-free, it becomes this massive resource base. And unfortunately, our country now, if we go to the policy side, has not signed the Law of the Sea Agreement. And so we're not in the discussions of all of these Arctic nations, even though we're getting all of this fish now, about the future of Arctic oil, gas, minerals, and fisheries. A big, big problem. So prepare to be surprised. Some of you may have seen this or not seen this. You've heard about it in the press, certainly. And it's about Eimskip. It's about an Icelandic short sea shipping company, 40-foot roll-on, roll-off containers, incredibly energy efficient, okay, is now moving. Take a look at that route. All of that product is not coming to Houston, not coming to New York, New Jersey. They've decided to home port all of their operations, U.S. operations, in Portland, Maine. So for the first time, oftentimes Maine is thought about to the end of the pipe, right? The end of the route, the end of the transportation corridor. We're in the beginning of a potential massive resource revolution. We're in the front door of the Arctic, and Maine has been called now the new near Arctic state. So when I went to Iceland 2 years ago, Maine had the largest delegation of any group at the Arctic Circle Assembly of 2,000 people, because a lot of people are paying attention to what this means. So we're getting a tidal wave of fish. Go to harbor fish. If you say you're going to harbor fishing, well, there was no cod and haddock, right? There's plenty of cod and haddock. And take a look at the prices of cod and haddock. So as Americans, we think about this as the whitefish market. And in the whitefish market is the highest demand of any type of fish is this type of fish. But it's also, if you notice, guess who's there? When we were in Iceland this year, in that tiny little country of 300,000 people, who was talking to the Icelandic prime minister was the prime minister of China. Okay, and there are Chinese airplanes in the bellies of 747s going to Beijing are filled with fish now coming out of Reykjavik. Okay, so this is now absolutely made this country, Iceland, size of Maine, okay? Take a little bit of the ice out of Iceland, same size of Maine, 300,000 people, 75% of them are in the area around Reykjavik, 75% of Mainers are around the area around Portland, okay? It's made us into like a strategic partner for the future of the Arctic and all of the changes that can go on in the Arctic. That means that are we going to then go, when we go into the Arctic, if it's going to be ice-free, maybe we can delay it a bit, but the future of some of the people in this audience and their children are probably going to see this. Does that mean that we're going to take all of our conventions, international conventions on fisheries, oil and gas and minerals, and not have a sustainability science vision for the future? I hope not. So what we're working tirelessly on is working with some of these countries, the Nordic countries, who have a new vision. That if this vision is coming out of our friends in Iceland, at the Iceland Ocean Cluster. Their vision is if we're going to harvest the cod, we're going to use 100% of the cod, not just the fillet for food. We're going to have marine pharmaceuticals. We'll have all kinds of new products coming for human health and wellness coming from the cod. So what they did is they showed us that there was about 80 new products that could come from one cod. And I'll show you in a second. So what we did, and President Ripich was there, this is a great picture. We have the Icelanders coming here and signing an agreement with us to create the New England Ocean Cluster. And this is President Ripich of UNE with President Glenn Cummings of USM on the bridge of the Icelandic shipping vessel, the Selfoss, signing an agreement to say that we are committed to a new generation of sustainability science in the North Atlantic corridor that is undergoing these rapid changes. This presents enormous opportunities in every single discipline in our universities and in our entire bioregion. So this is that picture. I should have had this slide before. So the cod used to be, few kroner. Now it's, you can see, it's $80 now. But take a look at the products. And when you really think about it, these individual species that we're taking out of the ocean, it's the future of our economies and literally of all of our health, science, and human health and wellness products and institutions. So what we're talking about, to give you an idea, is that right now we harvest only about 20% of the lobster and we throw everything else away. That 80% that we throw away, we're finding out by aligning these multiple institutions together throughout this bioregion, has miracle products embedded in it for innovation, for entrepreneurship. So we've got a goal in front of everyone here. Let's use 100% of anything we take from the ocean. Let's learn how to not only sustainably manage it, how to get the next generation of students involved in sustainability science, but commit to 100% utilization and none of the waste that we see. Okay, so I'm just going to end on this, is that we need, as Bethany Woodworth has said in a very articulate way, we need not only scientists, we need all types of intelligences, okay? If you look at the recent paper that came out of Science, you see it's a policy paper, and it talks about the miracles of what the Paris Agreement was. It was not an international convention that was managed at the international level. It's to be managed at the local national level. It presents huge opportunities for us and for our policy students to get involved in this. So remember, this is science. This is getting published in Science. So we need these kinds of new concepts. This is all coming out of some of the best and brightest. How do we form partnerships? How do we get our students involved in interdisciplinarity and communicate well? And so Rachel Carson was a pioneer about this. She was not a PhD scientist, but she did this kind of stuff. So I say all the time, what is science? Hypotheses about the human dimensions of the coast too. So I'm going to leave you here. This is nothing new, but this is truly the 21st century of the academy. We're putting adjectives in front of all of our traditional fields. We're coming up with a new range of scholarship, environmental marine scholarship, which takes into account all of the human dimensions, gender, race, history, her story, in all of these fields. And so this is where the marine world is not only going, this is where all of the academies are going throughout the United States and in the North Atlantic corridor. And I ask you to join in with us to see this happen in the lifetime of the young people in this audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Costa-Pierce. So far, we've heard about how this community has worked to mitigate climate change. We've heard different opportunities and options for education. And now we're going to hear from students about activities on campus, both past and future opportunities. First, I'd like to welcome Jessica Zitella, who is currently a sophomore at UNE, passionate about studying the environment and the effects of climate change. As current president of Earth's Eco, she hopes to get the student body involved with the local community in efforts to protect our planet. I'd also like to welcome two alumni students, Kat Santarpio, who graduated from UNE in May of 2016. She co-founded the group Fossil Free UNE her freshman year, a decision that has taken her to many places across the U.S. and introduced her to some wonderful people dedicated to mitigating human impacts on our planet's climate. Kat is honored to be here today to encourage others to pursue a bit of environmental activism. Sarah Fleshman graduated from UNE in May of 2016 with a major in environmental science and animal behavior. She plans to eventually continue her education before finding a job in the world of conservation. She was the previous co-president of Earth's Eco and a member of Fossil Free UNE after its inception. Through both groups, she assisted in spreading awareness, education, and actively trying to find ways to change our environmental footprint.
So our presentation is definitely a much needed one after the entire day of talking about the perils that our climate faces, especially in the near future. So we are going to talk about what we can do and what we have done. So we are primarily focusing on what we've done in the last 4 or so years, and let me tell you, half of the stuff we've done hasn't even made it in these slides. Our campus is really surprisingly environmentally active, and it is with great pleasure that we share some of the stuff we've been doing over the past few years. So one campaign that's really near and dear to my heart is fossil fuel divestment. Our university has an organization called Fossil Free UNE, and fossil fuel divestment, or divestment in general, if people are unfamiliar with the term, is pulling assets, it's usually money, out of a business for political or ethical reasons. And that kicked off in the 1960s and 70s with the apartheid movement, when American individuals and businesses pulled their money out of South African businesses that supported pretty much institutionalized racial segregation, and has been cited by some as the reason, or one of the key reasons, that put enough pressure on the government to really dismantle that movement. So we have pictures here of two pictures of the same university, 40 years apart. One on the left, they are advocating for the divestment of South African businesses, and on the right, they're at the People's Climate March advocating for the divestment of fossil fuels. So Fossil Free UNE started in 2012 with Bill McKibben's Do the Math Tour, and in the circle up to the right, you can actually see a group of UNE students. That whole section is, UNE students and professors, and it's amazing the turnout we got. And I don't want to do Bill McKibben a disservice talking about the Do the Math Tour, so wrote down some key facts about his presentation. He basically said, in a nutshell, we can release about 565 more gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere before we warm the planet an extra 2 degrees Celsius, which is what scientists claim are the maximum number of degrees we can raise the planet before we see amazing climate change, irreversible climate change. The problem with that is that we have about 3,000 gigatons of carbon ready to be released in our reserves, and we're always drilling for more. So we found pretty quickly we had a huge ethical dilemma. We just started at this university, it was our freshman year, that wholly supported us and wanted to invest in our futures. And they were also investing in these companies whose business model was not to protect the planet, it was to endanger our futures. So we acted on it. We went to Washington, D.C. for the Forward on Climate rally. We started our own No Keystone Pipeline protests at the Common Ground Fair. We went to Pennsylvania for Power Shift. God, so many other places. And we actually participated in the People's Climate March most recently, which was the largest climate march in the history of the world, walked with people like Jane Goodall and Leonardo DiCaprio and Bernie Sanders and, you know, a lot of key political figures, but it wasn't all fun and games. We actually really impacted a lot of people on campus. We went to the Environmental Council and passed a green sheet and got their full divestment support. We went to the undergrad student government and started our own subcommittee there to garner student support, and we had protests and demonstrations. We sought out Board of Trustee members and spoke with them. And actually, right before we graduated in May, we were heard. We got an email from awesome President Ripich, and she said to us, and again, I'm going to read her words so that nothing is skewed. We have 12 different funds made up of multiple different investments. 5 of those 12 have 0 fossil fuel investments, which is amazing. The remaining 7 out of 12 have less than 1% investments in fossil fuels, and the total across all funds was 2.5% of our total portfolio. She did end the email saying the subcommittee did not feel we should move out of any funds given the state of the markets. But the last time we checked, which was in 2013, UNE's endowment was $30 million. We did the math. 2.5% of that is $750,000. That's 15 students' tuition fee for a year. So you could go one way and say, you know what, $750,000, it's not that much money, whatever, we'll let it slide. But we could go the other way and say $750,000, that's not that much money. You know, we could pull out of fossil fuels, and instead of divesting and saying, oh yeah, we did it, reinvesting is the key to divestment, and you won't find that in any dictionary. But reinvesting in responsible communities and businesses is what we should do, I believe. And so Sarah is going to talk about some other really cool things we did on campus to help support that message.
So the other group that we're all a part of is something known as EarthSeco. EarthSeco is the environmental conscious group on campus. The acronym ECO stands for Environmentally Conscious Organization. And this was started over 8 years ago. Unfortunately, due to levels of interest and just attention, it keeps surging and decreasing. So it was actually missing until 2000, where a student decided to reinvent the club and bring it back. Since then, like I said, it's been surging again and dropping in attendance and just in attention to the ideas of what's going on campus for the environment. Our mission for this club especially is to spread education pertaining to the environment, but more than that, it's also to improve our environmental situation here on campus as well as within the community, both here on campus and outside in Biddeford in general. And we do this a number of different ways. We try to both be educational as well as interactive. So we show movies, we show documentaries. Blackfish was shown in the last couple years. Sometimes we show the Lorax, just, get people who don't necessarily know all that's going on interested as well in things not necessarily fully science, but still has a basis in it. We also bring speakers to campus as often as we possibly can. Speakers that are involved in small topics or large topics, whether it's community-based or globally. The picture on the right showcases one such documentary that we brought here known as Reuse, because you can't recycle the planet. We actually had Alex Reeves, who was the producer, director, and creator of this documentary, come in and not only explain to us the process of this documentary itself, but just have a full-on Q&A. It was educational, it was interactive, and it gave the students everything that we could possibly hope for in a single event. At the same time, the environment is a system. It's made up of different components. So as a group, we're not focused on one sole thing. Throughout the year, we have many different themes, and we try and change it up as often as possible. What we do every single year is something called Earth Week, where we have a panorama that changes for the entire week up in the dining hall. And it basically is there to both give facts and a visual for some sort of theme, and are both good choices and negative choices that come out from that. So in this example, we did factory farms versus local farms. And we had facts on the wall detailing, how a local farm can help with emissions of carbon, how choosing a local farm is good for not just the farmer itself, but the community as a whole. And throughout the week, we changed from a local farm to a factory farm, not only giving a visual of what that looks like, but also facts throughout so people understood. One of the other things that we do is something called Better World Books, which is an organization dedicated to fighting illiteracy in the world, as well as helping with recycling and helping with carbon emissions. We collect books from staff, from students, from faculty, books that are new, books that are used, and we provide them to Better World Books, who then either sells them at a cheaper price for students that can't afford them at normal, or donates them to nonprofits, such as Books for Africa and a bunch of other groups, or they recycle the books. Just to give you an idea, this group has, up until 2015, they have donated over 17 million books. The other important thing that we do in this group is we also partner with so many other groups on campus. The environmental department for the senior class has a capstone that all students are required to take, and one of the groups in that capstone course decided to work with us in order to put signage out into the forested area that we own just across the road, both for spreading awareness for what trees we have out there, but just getting people interested. As you're walking down a path and you see a sign, hopefully you'll take a look at it. But also just to get people outside was our biggest goal. I want to quickly go back to what Kat was mentioning earlier about Bill McKibben, and I want to quickly give a quote about him that he says, and he says, "Climate change is the single biggest thing that humans have ever done to this planet. The one thing that needs to be bigger is our movement to stop it." The issue with that quote is the fact that there's a huge disconnect. People ask, what can I do? Or how do I do it? But then a lot of the times they don't actually try to accomplish that. And I guess my question for all of you from this point on up into the discussions is, why is that? And how can we resolve that issue with this disconnect? Like I said before, we sometimes have quite a bit of issue with having attention in this club, with having attendance, with having people that are interested. How do we resolve that issue? It's something that we've been fighting for quite a few years. And especially with the fact that at the end of our senior year, last May, just before, UNE decided to change its slogan to Innovation for a Healthier Planet. And I want to finish my part by quoting Theodore Roosevelt, who was a huge believer in the environment. He says, "Do what you can with what you have, where you are. We are a university that has a beautiful ecosystem, multiple. But if we're all not trying to do something to help that, if we don't have that interest, and we have tons of passionate people, how can we say that we're being innovative?" So I'm going to now pass it to Jess, who's going to continue as the new president of EarthEco and where they're heading now.
Thank you, guys. So these two wonderful ladies right here have set an incredible precedent for what EarthEco is capable of when we have active and impassioned members. And as Sarah was saying, the surges have been coming, and even this year, our members at meetings have gone from 15 one meeting to 2 another. But I know that the passion is still there because we still have accomplished so much this year alone. This year, here's our Arts Eco symbol. This year, we put together a large-scale event, which we had about 70 people attend, called Back to Our Roots. This had local businesses, a farmer's market, environmentally based clubs on campus like Honeybee Conservation Club, and as well as Arts Eco, come together and have booths to inspire each other to talk about what's going on our campus and what we can do to help each other spread awareness. So all throughout this, people could walk around the booths together and listen to a local band. And of course, we ended with a bonfire because that's the best way to end an event there is. So we have also utilized our community as much as we possibly can because this is incredibly important. We have worked with local schools, church groups, businesses all throughout while they were here and continuing on now. We spread the word because even though individual actions are incredibly important, a lot of times they can seem like a drop in the bucket. But when you work together, a flood of action can occur. So because of this, we are currently working with a local parish group to spread the word of Laudato Si and Before the Flood. And we have also gone to local schools to teach kids the importance of recycling and climate change to get that next generation involved. And that being said, our community does not end at the Biddeford or Saco lines. It extends outwards to Dakota, to the rest of the world. And as many of the people in the club right now are dying to drop all of our responsibilities and go protest and take a road trip, we have settled with creating a donation box instead, which is currently in the student involvement suite in the campus center if anyone is inclined to donate. So we just want to keep the community involved and keep spreading the word just to be able to create a change and an action. So another fantastic group on this campus that I'm not personally involved with but is doing very important work is the Solar Ambassadors. They are a group of students who work with Revolve, which is a company based out of San Francisco, and we are one of only 7 schools that has been accepted into this program. Revolve works with groups across the country to finance solar incentives. And so currently, their goal is to get the community involved together through renewable resources and energy projects. And one way that our solar ambassadors on this campus are doing this right now is through Camp Ketcha in Scarborough. They're working with the kids at this camp, and they reach out to various families of all different types of groups. And they're working with this generation to know about the importance of renewables and get them involved as early as possible. So I've found that this campus is full of people who have grand opinions and a voice that is being buried. I'm not sure why that occurs, but compared to larger public schools, our campus is almost silent when it comes to issues about climate change and our environment. And yet, whenever a petition about bird glass or a balloon release comes out across the campus, it is all anybody can talk about, and we get signatures that shatter expectations. The passion is there on this campus, and despite it being our greatest weapon to fight for what we believe in, we seem to be afraid of it. So I just want to tell everybody that our resources are here on campus. We have the eco reps, we have Earth's Eco, we have the solar ambassadors, the environmental council, everybody on campus. Our resources are there. All you have to do is reach out. If you have an idea about something that we can do on campus, come talk to us. We're not that scary. We are college students, and we're expected to be these crazy liberal hippies that protect our own rights, the rights of others, and the rights of our planets. And I feel like that is something that that's an expectation that we need to live up to. So thank you.